Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone out to our City Council work meeting this evening, which is November 19th, 2020. And we'll get started with our council reports. So council, does anyone have anything to report on? Mr. Thomas.
Due to the governor's speech, the recreation's canceled everything. And they'll kind of look at it next week. Like who cares? And reevaluate. But there was something else that was coming up. What is it?
The lighting?
Yeah, the lighting ceremony's on the next Monday.
Monday, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know how, I assume they want it to be kind of low-key because of the nature of things, but it will be held. So the lights will be on next Monday, and for after that, you can ride around your car and be fine.
Okay.
And you can get out, so I should say that too, if you want
Sure,
to.
you can walk the park.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that. Anyone else? Okay, very good. Then let's go ahead and continue with our training moment, which will be given by our city attorney, Gary Crane.
All right.
Could we do this
Training
tomorrow?
moment has been brought to you by.
Is that what you just said?
Oh, and I was reading
I
this.
knew you didn't want to be offensive,
What did he say?
but no, you did.
Tomorrow.
So I'll take this off if that's all right. Just looking at the picture up there, you know what the discussion is going to be on today, right? Going to be know where you're going before you start out on the journey, right? I'm kidding. It's on development agreements is what we're going to do. And the reason that picture's up there is there's a recent case. The Moab case is what they call it. And I just wanted to tell you about it really, really quick, just give you a snapshot of what happened. There was a development agreement on the land regarding the land surrounding, this is Lionsback. Lionsback, I don't think they let anybody go up there anymore, but you used to be able to go out all the way up the top, and there's a famous picture, Clint just showed it to me tonight, of a Suburban going all the way back down and losing its brakes on the way down. And it was jumping and bumping and it went off the top. So maybe know where you're going before you actually launch isn't a bad idea. But around Lionsback, there's some prime property. In roughly 2015, that property was scheduled to be and actually went through an actual process before the city council for rezoning. And it was at a time when Moab really wanted individuals to come in and do something with the property around this, put in some really nice condominium type situations along with a mix of commercial. Anyway, that agreement was put in place. This is Sitla land. This is state land. It's owned by the organization that actually invests or looks for investment in property that they're given as a result of a tax exemption for certain properties, mining properties and that type of thing. It's given to Sitla to use for the education of our children. So they got a really, really powerful argument as to why they really need as much money as they can get out of this land around Lionsback. And so they put together this development agreement. And years later, nothing happened. And years later, in about 2018, somebody comes forward and says, I think we'd like to develop. We're going to develop around there. And let's just use what we've got. And the city council in its wisdom said, you know what you're bringing to us is different enough that you're not going to be able to use this development agreement. And Sitla said, if you don't do this, we're going to go ahead and let them develop themselves because we're a state of Utah agency and sorry, Moab, we're going to put the pressure on. And so Moab said, well, maybe we can just tweak the agreement a little bit and try and get it to fit. And so they stretched it and they tortured it and they put it on the rack and they ended up in coming up with an agreement that actually allowed for considerably more density in the area. Okay? So you got a development agreement, an old development agreement that has been amended. And what kind of action is that? An amendment of an agreement is a legislative or administrative. Administrative, right? I'm going to give you Give you that one.
The answer.
Supposed to be administrative, all right? Agreements are generally administrative, right? So they put it through with the increase in density and got all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you know what? The reason that there are standards and regulations regarding hearings on zoning decisions is so people can have input into things like an increase in density. So when you put that in your development agreement, you turn this from an administrative decision into a legislative decision. And there should have been a hearing, it should have gone to the Planning Commission, and then you should have had a vote. If you'd have done it that way, City Council, we'd have been okay with what you did. But of course the City Council didn't want to put up with the anger of the surrounding residents, which did not want to see anything changed. So development agreements are a peculiar thing. This year at the legislature, you're going to see actually a change in the development, in the law, to add a provision defining what a development agreement does. And I've got before you just a brief summary, and I'm sorry it just looks like a legal document blown up, okay, but...
Can I ask you a question, Gary?
Sure.
So I'm a little confused. You say it was an administrative decision, but we pass those we vote on those.
That's correct. Yeah. But when you vote on those development agreements, usually they're in conjunction with a rezone. And so generally you have a hearing beforehand, but the agreement itself is administrative. The change in zoning is legislative. And so you could pass the agreement by a vote of the council. It doesn't mean the council doesn't vote on it. It just means you don't have to have the public hearings when it's administrative, unless the code says you do. And there's not very many cases where you have to have a hearing for an administrative determination.
We still have to vote on it, though.
You still have to vote on it. Because there's two kinds of decisions that you make. The first kind of decision is you make a decision based on the ordinances that you put into place. And that is a legislative decision. And those ordinances are the use of your police power. That's where you make somebody do something because you said they need to do it, and they need to do it this way. There's a second way that you make decisions, and that is through development agreements. Those are supposed to be agreements where two people get together, the developer and the city, and you agree upon certain things, and both of you bring something to the table. And that's a contractual agreement. Okay, you're not using your police power with a development agreement unless you do what Moab did, which is you exceed what the law lets you do, what the ordinance lets you do, what the permitted uses and the densities that you've set in place by ordinance allow you to do. If you're going to exceed that by a development agreement, the courts are going to say, oh boy, you guys have gone way beyond your authority, your police powers, by doing this without a public hearing and all the other trappings of legislative decision. But as long as you stay within your ordinance, you can negotiate a development agreement back and forth between you and the developer until you come to a conclusion as to what's comfortable for the two of you. And what types of things can you typically, and I promised Alex that I'd only go 10 minutes today, and so I'll try and cut it short at 10 minutes. But you've got development agreements that you do for annexations, very liberal. You can do just about anything to somebody who's trying to annex into your boundaries. Zone changes, a little bit more intense, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to limit maybe some of the things that, for example, if you think that's a good place for a certain zone, but you want to limit the uses, you can use a development agreement to be a little limiting. And then you've got subdivision. You really don't need a development agreement most of the time for subdivisions, but we put them in place anyway, because what we like to do is hold the individual's feet to the fire when they come in with a certain design or design standard. It's like the park. When they came in, we knew exactly where the different densities were going to be located, and we knew what the densities would be and where the park area would be and where the recreation, and that's another type of development agreement. And then you've got commercial site plans, and then finally you've got settlement agreements. So caution then, right? Out of tonight's 10 minutes or training minute, what do you have to be cautious about in relationship to what I just told you about Moab and the mistake they made? You have to be cautious that you don't exceed your ordinance in a development agreement. Don't exceed what your ordinance will allow you to do, already allows you to do, because the instant you do, you start to get into the category of making a legislative decision. When you start to change the ordinance, you start to change the densities, for example, you're changing the ordinance. When you increase densities, you're changing the ordinance. You can always decrease densities. You know, you can say in the development agreement that we're going to allow R18s rather than R110s, even though this is an R110 zone, because we want more area for this. PRUD is a great example of it's one big development agreement, essentially, where the two of you get together and the city says, we'll give you these bonuses if you do these things. That's a great example of an ordinance that actually gives you the authority to be able to negotiate like that. Any questions that you have on development agreements? This is just kind of a crash course to say to you, just be careful when you put into place a development agreement, because you don't want to overstep the things that you put into a development agreement and turn them into something that would be a legislative act. Yes.
And maybe you just answered it, but where under the can is be more restrictive than ordinance. So that was the example where you can go to an R18 versus the ordinance
Sure.
allows for an R110. But when you come down to the can't, provide for excessive exactions, that's the other example that you're given where you can't change density to something higher than what was.
Yes, but an exaction usually deals with a specific type of improvement or something you're asking them for.
Okay.
Like, for example, I want a bridge over here that will service everybody that comes from Syracuse into Layton. You know, I want a bridge on this road. It has nothing to do with my subdivision, but you're going to try and impose that on me by agreement? In other words, by state law, you couldn't do it. By your police powers, you can't do it because it's excessive. But you demand something that is, or you demand a regional park, this developer to dedicate a regional park by development agreement to the city. A problem with that? Yeah, it's way in excess of what, so you still have to, your agreements still have to be within the law when it comes to exactions and when it comes to what the law allows them to do in that zone. But you do have a lot of flexibility with the I love development agreements. I think they're great because the developer knows what he is vesting in, actually knows what he's vesting in.
I'm assuming that includes permitted and conditional uses in those
Yes.
zonings. I mean, maybe that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
great.
So
Yeah.
you can go out and maybe come back, but you can't be in one zone and try to act like you're in another zone
Right.
with the development agreement.
Yeah, you can't switch zones with a development agreement. That becomes a legislative act. Okay.
Did anything ever happen in Moab?
Did anything ever happen to Moab?
Yeah, did it develop?
They reversed it, and so the developers are having to start all over again with public hearings. It wasn't that it was a bad decision. What it was that it was a decision not done the right way. And so I think this year you're going to see at the legislature a provision that says that if a development agreement has something that is over the top, is greater than what your ordinance currently allows you to do, that you're going to have to go back through the planning commission with that development agreement. That's what it's going to say. So, does that help?
Yeah, so when we do it, you're going to tell us we're wrong.
I'll try as many times as I possibly can to tell you you're wrong.
That's
because
all
then-
I care. Somebody's going to say, hey, you can't do that.
So that gives me value.
Hey,
So-
you're the most valuable person I know,
All right.
you know?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gary, we appreciate that. All right, let's move on then to item number 3, which is Senate Bill number 3, and Chad Wilkinson's going to share that topic with us.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This is an annual report on our moderate income housing element of our general plan. I'm gonna grab the mouse from the. Can you hear me now? Okay. So, just really briefly, this is a requirement by Senate Bill 34 that was passed a couple of years ago, that we, first of all, adopt a moderate income housing element to our general plan. We've done that. That was done last year as part of the general plan adoption. The state law further requires that each year we provide a report on how we're accomplishing the goals and policies of that plan related to some strategies that the state has required that cities implement in their general plan. So again, this is the Senate bill. It requires us to to provide a reasonable opportunity for a variety of housing types, including moderate income housing, excuse me. These are those 23 strategies that the state requires that cities provide at least 3 or more of those in their moderate income housing plan. We've done several of these, but we're going to focus on 4 tonight, 4 of these strategies that we've implemented over the last year and made some progress on. I want to just note again that this is a report. We're not looking to adopt anything new tonight. This is just to tell you how we've done on these things. And then once we've made this report to you, the legislative body, then we will forward the report to the Department of Workforce Services, the local, to Wasatch Front Regional Council, our MPO, and others that are required by state law. So really quick, we chose 4 of these. The 4 are highlighted there in yellow. I'm going to go through those in detail here in just a minute. First strategy we want to talk about that we've made some progress is that one of the strategies in state law is that we allow for a higher density or moderate income residential development in commercial, mixed use, commercial centers, employment centers, et cetera. One of those developments that we've approved this year was a 20-unit studio apartments at Valeria and Gordon Avenue. You probably remember that project coming through. Again, that type of project, those higher densities within that mixed-use center directly responds to that strategy from state law. The second strategy, continue to promote investments near transit, particularly in RDA and opportunity zones. You're aware of the work that was done before our general plan was adopted with the Case Crossing down in our downtown. We have other developments that are located close to the transit and those RDA and opportunity zones. Layton Parkway Apartments is one that's had the initial approval by the council within the last year, at least for the zoning change. We also, we're going to talk a little bit more about this some more tonight, but the Winkle property, which is represented over on the left-hand side of the property, the screen. This is a picture that was shared with the school board as we went through the approval process. Those are examples of projects that, again, are achieving that goal of promoting investment near transit and RDA and opportunity zones. Third strategy, again, this is something from the state code, but it's something that we've also felt the need to look at, and that's our parking reductions that we brought to you just recently. You can see those numbers there. We did look at those areas, particularly, it talks about in that state code section, looking at areas, again, proximate to transit, proximate to downtowns. Those are the areas that we looked at, areas where someone could potentially live without the need for a car, in fact, like Case Crossing. So those are areas we spent some particular time looking at, and that recent code change was in direct response to that state criteria. Fourth one, this is coordination with WFRC, UDOT, other state agencies, state and regional agencies. That's something that we've done before, we continue to do. We'll continue to work with them. They were a very strong part of the adoption of our general plan. We received some funding through their technical planning assistance program. You can see that highlighted there in yellow. We'll continue to do that. We've also made some recent applications for some additional funding for some analysis of some of our development along the West Davis corridor, and that's a joint application with several different communities. So those are some examples of that kind of collaboration that, again, achieves that strategy that's spelled out in state code. The other piece of this report is to report on the projections of 5-year affordable housing needs. Now, we have a couple of different categories of that. I'm going to go through that top one first and then explain a little bit about those bottom numbers. But these are the projected growth for households. We've identified townhome and multifamily units. In your packet, there's a detailed description of what these numbers mean. But these are the numbers within that 5-year period that we would project would be needed to meet our share of the population growth in those various housing types. You can see those numbers there, 1,400 townhome multifamily. As far as the demand, projected housing stock would be just a little bit over that. Median income housing cost, $1,348. The projected median household income is $98,381. That's that 5-year projection, which is the 80% of that area median income is $78,000. The current AMI is $84,000 and some change. Is that right, Brandon? And I failed to do something at the first that I was going to do. I'm going to do it now. I want to give a lot of credit to Brandon and Tim for their work on both the moderate income housing plan that was adopted last year and on this report. They really put these numbers together and did all the hard work on the analysis. So I want to give them due credit, and they're here to answer any questions tonight as well. But that's the numbers there on the top part. The bottom part, those numbers are actually generated from a calculator that's provided by the Department of Workforce Services. And that calculator looks at, it's a pretty robust model of looking at the area median income, the census data for the number of families that we have at each of these various percentages of that area median income, the number of units that are available that could be rented within criteria that meet affordability criteria. That's a certain percentage of their annual income that can go towards housing. And it spits out, once you type those numbers in, it spits out some numbers to you for the needs that we have. So we tossed around whether to put the word available, and Brandon's going to be surprised to see available on there because we took it out earlier today. But the reason we had that taken out was that these are not vacant units. That's the tricky part. When we say available, these are not vacant units. These are units that are in excess of what's required to meet that population that's 80% of our adjusted median family income. So what they do in that calculator is they look at the number of those families that are in that 80% criteria, the number of units that we have available for those families that could meet that affordability criteria, and then what's left over. So that's the leftover. Those are units that are currently rented, but that's the ones that are still, I guess, in excess of those minimum we would need to meet that affordability for that percentage. Same thing all the way down, 50%. The one number that we wanted to point out that's difficult to meet is that bottom category, 30% of the county's adjusted median family income. That calculator indicates that we're 600 units short on that. So where we have excess in the other categories, that one's 600 units short. Now that's a tough one for a variety of reasons, and this is not unique to Layton, but if you can see our projected AMI, that's that area median income, that this is 30% of that projected is 29,000. Now that's for the entire household. So an entire household, that's husband, wife, or spouse, significant other, whoever's living in that household. That's the total of all the income coming into that household. So it's not just one person's earnings, that's everything. And currently that's 25,000. So you can see that's, when you start to plug in those numbers for that category of folks, really you're starting to talk about the need for subsidies and those types of things, because we don't, when you look at the standard is 30% of your annual income going toward housing is where you start, that's what you'd expect, and before you start to become, what's the cost burdened? Cost burden is the word. So if you look at those numbers, really, at 25,000, you're looking at $600 a month roughly for rent, and that's just, there's not a lot of units out there like that. So that's a tough number to meet for all communities. That's I think the second prong of the efforts by the state to meet these affordable housing goals is to find a way to address that lowest of the low number. But that's the explanation for why that number shows what it shows. So that is our report. Again, this is a report. We're not looking for any changes to our policies or to the general plan. We're just reporting on the progress that we've made and updating those projections. Are there any questions?
Chad, I just have a couple, and you kind of just answered the one about how are we looking at increasing affordable rental options for the low income? I mean, I know that's a state problem. It's also part of the homelessness that's going on, and so, hopefully our county as a whole will also be looking at how do we address that. I mean, no community really wants it, but we need to. And then under 5E, you had talked about the parking ordinance that had passed in September, and then it states that we have since approved 500 units since September. Can you help me figure out what 500 units since September we've approved?
So the Jake's property, that revision to their plan up there on Highway
Okay.
193 is a big chunk of that. What would be the other? Okay, Layton Parkway Apartments, which are under review. Okay.
Okay.
So there's, Layton Parkway Apartments, that's the MODA development, correct? So those are the ones that are on the Tanner, or the IHC property north of the Parkway,
Okay.
north of the hospital.
I just couldn't come up with 500
Yeah.
that have come through us, and so, okay.
And to answer your first question, I think it's a comprehensive look at it that's going to require not just one community, but some, looking at it from a state and county perspective of how we can make those work. There's a number of strategies, and in those 23 strategies that the state outlines, there's strategies for using state funding, using county funding and programs to try to meet that need. But it's a tough one to meet because it is so cost burdened, and trying to get those affordable units built is tough. So, any other questions on that? Thank you, council. We'll forward this on to the Department of Workforce Services, and we'll be back next year.
Okay, don't go away, you're up next.
Okay.
So now we'll have our proposed amendment to the Layton Municipal Code.
Thank you. This is a work session item only. This is our home occupation text amendment. Just to give you a progress report, this has been to the Planning Commission already at work session, and they've had a public hearing. The Planning Commission has asked us to make a few final adjustments to this, which we've made, that you have in your copy. They're taking one final look at it on Tuesday night, and then they'll forward their final version to you for, we hope, for review and adoption at your December 3rd meeting. But I want to go through just briefly the highlights of that. We've made some pretty big updates. We've categorized our home occupations into low and high impact. Low impact would allow for one additional non-resident employee without any kind of special approval, or it would just be allowed by right. Then there's a high impact home occupation that would allow for up to 2 additional non-resident employees, and would allow for clients, visitors, people to come to the site under criteria that would be established through an approval process. High impact would include things like barbers, consultants, contractors, in-person counseling, things that have higher impacts on a neighborhood, home instruction, those kind of things that could potentially bring traffic into the neighborhood. The high impact review process is a process that would allow for a neighbor to collect signatures, go to their neighborhood, go to the neighbors surrounding their home and say, this is what I'd like to do. And if they can get those signatures, then they are allowed to go through administratively for approval. It's a way to streamline that process for them. If they can't get the straight signatures, that's not no. It just means that at that point, they go through a conditional use permit review that would go to the Planning Commission for review. Conditions that are specifically identified under that conditional use permit review would be limits on hours, the number of visitors, required parking, those kind of things to help mitigate concerns to the neighbors. We did make one significant change, which is we have an unlimited number of off-site employees. These are employees that never come to the house. They're never going to come to the house. We have new models out there where you have consulting firms and others that may have employees in Kalamazoo. That was for Tim. That's a little thing for him. But Kalamazoo or some other location, far-flung, that are never going to be there. There's not going to be any impact on the neighborhood. Right now, our code is very specific and says no outside employees are allowed. So we want to make that change that addresses just the changes to our way of doing business. And we've had several of these come in the last year that we've been a little frustrated that we'd have to tell them no as well. But we want to be able to say, yes, if you don't have anybody ever coming, your employees in another state or another city, you can have an unlimited number of those because there's no additional impacts to the neighborhood.
Quick question on that. Is there a certification they have to say our business model is still the same and stuff like that?
And this one, home occupation is a little bit different of an animal because we actually review these every year as part of the business license review. So we're on a conditional use permit or something else, we might not review those specific conditions every single year. On this type of thing, we're looking at those every year as part of the business license approval. So if things change, they have to let us know. And any other questions on that?
Are you addressing equipment that goes along with a home occupation? I know that's a lot of times the concern is what they're bringing along with them equipment-wise.
Yeah, I'll go to that next year. That's a good segue into our next slide here. So we have use limitations. There's just things that apply to every home occupation out there. Noise, dust, fumes, glares, that's in our existing ordinance. That's just a way to say, hey, if you're going to have something that is out of the ordinary or that's creating noise or dust, fumes, things that you wouldn't normally associate with the neighborhood, those are not appropriate. So those are limited. We have hours of operation limits on these home occupations. Sales displays, again, we don't allow now in our ordinance to have a retail face for your store or for your home occupation. So what we want to discourage is people coming off the street and going in and having a storefront. But if you're a hairdresser that sells a little bottle of shampoo that says, hey, you may like this shampoo that I used on your hair today, and you have just a couple of bottles here, that's something that's considered incidental sales. There's no storefront. It's incidental to the use that they have going on, the hair cutting. We have alternations in there again, Tim, just so we can correct that next time, but it's structural alterations. We found out that alternations is a word, but it doesn't mean what we're trying to say. Alterations is what we mean to say there. And that just means that your house should look like a house. At the end of the day, this should be invisible to your neighbors. You're not supposed to be making alterations to that. But you know, it's funny how you read those slides and then you read them on the screen and it seems to pop out like a I don't know, is it on your forehead or something? But yeah, it's not alternations, it's alterations. We did restrict some businesses. We do feel that there are some that just aren't appropriate for home occupation use. That would be medical, surgical procedures. We do think that there's a place for some, you know, we think it's going to be rare because we don't see a lot of requests for these, but if someone wanted to have a home medical office, that could potentially happen, as long as there's not those uses that would create impacts to the neighborhood, surgical procedures, those kind of things that would create potential impacts on the neighborhood, either through sounds, fumes, chemicals, whatever the case may be. Machine shops is another one that, you know, it's tough, and we know that there are folks that do this as a hobby, but that's one that can quickly expand beyond what a home occupation would be and create impacts to neighbors. Major appliance and electronics repair. This is one where, besides the sounds involved, we also tend to see that those, for whatever reason, they expand beyond and they start to have storage of appliances outside of the home to the side of the home. So that's one that we feel is not appropriate for home occupation. Carpentry, cabinet making. Again, this is one you could certainly have a contractor that uses his home as his office, but if we start to have things where we're prefabricating walls or doing cabinetry work on the site where we have a lot of dust and noise going on that would generate impacts to the neighborhood, that's one that we don't think is appropriate as a home occupation. Permanent yard sales, yep, they happen. We want to say that those are not allowed. Tattooing, again, that's one of those that just, for a variety of reasons, we've recommended that we exclude. Trailer boat and RV and UTV, repair. We do have mobile folks. What we're talking about here is on-site. We have approved and will continue to approve those folks that just have a truck with a few tools in it that go out and do mobile RV and UTV repair. We've allowed that for a long time. We found very little problems with those as long as they don't have the trailers and boats and RVs at their house. As long as they're going to the person's house, it's not a lot of impacts. Upholstering's kind of that same deal with a compressor and the sounds that come with a little staple gun, those types of things. Vehicle auto body repair, painting of vehicles, those have a variety of impacts. Welding, vehicle sales. And there are certain vehicle sales that are exempt under state law, and that's just your own personal vehicle sales. That's not what we're talking about. There are rules related to that, and how many cars you can sell as an individual per year. But anything that exceeds those exemptions in state law would not be allowed. Let's see. We talked about that a little bit. I think these are just some pictures. Okay, yeah, we had a couple duplicate slides. This is something that came up with the Planning Commission that they wanted to have. We're going to show this to them on Tuesday night. Wanted to have an idea of what we were talking about when it came to equipment. We allow under the proposed ordinance, up to 2 vehicles that are 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight or less, and then one that's between 10 and 14,000 pounds. That's an or, if I remember right. Is that right, Tim? Not an and or an or. It's an or. 2 or 1. Yeah, thank you. So this just gives you an idea of what those different vehicles are. Our current ordinance says 1.5 tons, and what we're finding out is that that's kind of an antiquated. We all know what that means, kind of, I guess, anecdotally, what that 1.5 tons means. But what we're finding is a lot of those, what would have been considered a 1.5 tons back in the day, the payloads are actually much bigger than that now because of technology. So gross vehicle weight is the best way. It's easy for someone to figure that out. If you go open the door on your car, you can see what your gross vehicle weight rating is off the bat. Oh, thank you. So Tim just gave me some stuff to answer your question about outdoor storage of equipment. I'll get there in just 1 second, Don. But that gives you an idea of what those types of vehicles would look like. You've got kind of a step van or a larger or a smaller walk-in, The vehicles that would be excluded would be things that are that larger vehicle type, those that maybe have a semi-cab with a box on the back, some of those larger. We did find that some of our food trucks can meet that gross vehicle weight rating, some can't. Just depends on the food truck. So those that could meet it could potentially be stored on site. Those that can't they'd have to find an off-site place to store those vehicles. With that, just a couple other things on use limitations. just nothing that's going to be hazardous to the public. These are just kind of general statements. No excessive demand for public utilities and services. There's an example that came up in another community that I was in before where the person was proposing a server farm in their home. And what happened was, the way we became aware of it, was that the
A what
power
farm?
company, a server farm, I'll explain what that is. The power company
you.
said to us, hey, why are these guys requesting this huge power service? And we said, we don't know. And so we looked into it, and the reason why servers, they're computer servers, they process data. They wanted to establish that in the basement of their home, a big one. And it needed more power than what a typical residence would require. So that's the kind of thing we'd be looking to prohibit, is those that are not, it should be invisible, right? It should be just like a home. It should be exactly like those types of impacts of a home. Or if there are impacts that are different from a home, ways to mitigate those. Neighborhood disruptions not permitted. These are just general statements. Then delivery of vehicles. We say no excessive impact, but there's actually hours included in there, if I remember right. Or is that in the MU? Okay. We're getting some of our codes mixed up here as we go through this, because we've got several code amendments tonight. But there are limits on delivery vehicles. Are that, typically a typical home may see a few Amazon Prime
I
delivery
was
vehicles
just
each
gonna
day.
ask, what about the Amazon
So
deliveries?
that's the kind of thing we're talking about, is if it's typical, if we're not bringing big semis in every day, if it's just an Amazon Prime vehicle that comes in and drops things off, picks things up, that's the kind of things you'd expect to see. So if it's over and above that, that's what we want to prohibit. To answer your question, really quick, Don, what it says is, on outdoor yard space, the home occupation shall not involve the use of any outdoor yard space for storage or display of materials, supplies, inventory, inoperable vehicles, or equipment, unless it's specifically stored in an enclosed vehicle, enclosed trailer, or within an accessory structure. So we did expand this out to allow people to use a detached accessory structure, a small portion of one, for some storage of some of those equipment, as long as it's contained inside those, and also a little bit of allowance for in a garage. We want to make sure people still have enough parking, but a little bit of allowance for that. So that's really quick. Those are the highlights, the big things. You have, of course, the full ordinance there before you. If there's any other questions, Tim and I can try to answer those.
Chad, I have a couple of questions. The signature process with the neighbors,
Yeah.
is that being done in other communities? Is that and how has that been happening in those other communities?
It works really well. I think when those uses are things that are reasonable, what I found other places where this process is implemented is that the ones that are tough are the guys that are not following the rules, and that's when the neighbors say, no way, I'm not going to give you your signature. Here's why. They'll write letters to the city, emails to the city. Sometimes it's storage of materials outside. Sometimes it's just those folks that are being bad actors and are not following the rules or not willing to, and so really those kind of folks shouldn't be operating a business if they're not willing to meet the rules anyway. So that's the only time where you get objections. Most of the time, it's not a problem. These are people that know their neighbors. They've gone and talked to them about what they want to do, whether it's piano lessons or a little barber shop or whatever the case may be. And 85% of them have no problems. That there are a few that, because they're not following the rules, that do have some issues.
And my second question, we had for lack of a better word, the incident with the Snap-on franchise Snap-on truck. Where would that truck fit in that graphic that you showed us?
There's a couple different
Or is that because of
options.
the,
That's actually probably up in your class 6 to class 7 would be where those trucks would be. They usually have a lot of the ones now have a semi cab with a box on the back. Some of them fall into this category. They have a couple different options you can buy, but you don't usually see a lot of these smaller walk-ins anymore with Snap-on. They're a bigger truck, just to have more inventory. And of course, those would still, it's the storage of the vehicle. If they could find an approved commercial location, which we've done in the past for them, they could still store it off-site and have their home office at that location. It's just the storage of the vehicle there is the problem.
So Chad, back to Clint's question on the neighbors. I heard it at the planning commission, but they may be interested to know who you're considering as a neighbor. It's just not next door.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for bringing that up, Tom. So, yeah, it's anybody that's abutting so it would be abutting or adjacent. So across the street, those that touch the property, those that are behind them and touch the property too. So anybody abutting or adjacent. Does that?
Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah.
I'm good with it. I just thought maybe they would know.
It's not like a 500-foot notice or anything though, but it's those that would be the most impacted by the use. So,
in the jurisdictions that have used this, have they had any interest in any instances where, like I was thinking of my dad, someone comes and asks him if he maybe hates what they're doing next door, and they come and ask him for a signature, he's probably going to sign it. So I just didn't know if there was, and then maybe they were wanting to rely on the ordinances as is instead of feeling like they're giving permission to something maybe they don't have the, most people are going to agree to whatever their neighbor comes around because they want to keep the peace, you know. So
Yeah,
I just don't
That's
know if
hard,
there was.
hard to say. If, I'm not sure if there have been people that have not wanted to sign but signed anyway. I know this is not an approval. In other words, the neighbors don't give approval. This is a way for them to streamline that process
Right.
and to skip the CUP, the conditional use permit process, but they still have an avenue to go through a conditional use permit process. In that case, if there was someone that was being a bad actor, there'd be some very specific conditions applied that would say you have to meet these codes.
Yeah.
If they don't meet it, then there's a way for us to revoke conditional use permits, revoke business licenses. There's a process to get that taken away. at
And
that point.
I like the idea of the signature. I think it's an interesting one, and I think it's good to streamline it if it's like piano lessons or something like that. Obviously, everyone's going to agree to that, and if they can streamline that, I think that's a good way of doing it. I was just trying to think of instances where it may not be the best.
Okay. Council, any other questions on this?
And you'll get another whack at this one in a couple weeks too, so, yep.
Okay, all right, thank you for the update. You want to take the next item?
Yeah, I'm going to tag team this one. I'm going to actually just introduce, so you saw this at a work session previously. Again, Planning Commission's already recommended approval of this with some tweaks. Based on feedback we got from you at the last meeting, we've met with some individual counselors and made some changes to address those concerns as well. So I'm going to let Tim address that and hand it over to you, Tim.
All right, good to be with you and provide not a full recap of what was presented in the last meeting, but maybe just a couple of highlights as well as some modifications that we recommend in terms of refinement of this draft ordinance. And so just a reminder, this is an idea of expanding use in mixed-use areas recommended in our general plan. And in looking at it comprehensively, we saw that it could apply not just to mixed-use areas, but also to some of our commercial uses. And a lot of the focus is on the sound in terms of what's an appropriate level of intensity for certain mixed-use areas, mixed-use settings, or commercial settings. And what this graph represents is the intensity of sound based on use. And about 85 decibels, we have a busy restaurant. It's kind of the indicator. And you've also seen graphics that a different graphic shows that it's kind of a loud vacuum is about an 85 decibel, and certain types of laser cutters and so forth. So here's an example of a use, a new use, that could be allowed in MU, MUTOD, and even CP1, CP2, that would have a storefront where items that are manufactured or displayed for sale. We provide that active front onto a street, but then the production in the back. But these, again, are lower impact type of maker spaces, high-tech manufacturing, food preparation, and so forth. So a couple of the modifications that we'd like to share with you for consideration are to create consistency between the mixed use and the mixed use TOD in terms of suggestion or a requirement rather that mixed-use buildings have a 12-foot floor-to-floor ceiling height along Main Street in particular, that this mixed-use corridor is an important corridor for commerce, and that it should be prioritized for having at least the potential for commercial use and live-work use. And so that taller ceiling height allows for the potential for what could start as a ground-level residential unit could convert eventually into more of an office or even a retail use. And so the language is now consistent, or shown here as consistent, to reflect that notion applicable to Main Street. Up in the upper left, you see the language that's been in the draft reviewed by the Planning Commission and in your packet. And this relates to noise emission limitations. And so this is a suggestion to further refine those limitations and make them specific to mixed-use areas in particular. And I'll just kind of read through the the recommendations for mixed-use and mixed-use TOD, which would be the same. And so first, this repeated reference to an 85 decibel level as the maximum, and not emitting detectable vibration, dust, odor, fumes, or gas at the boundary of the property. And that's same as the current draft and what the Planning Commission reviewed. Additionally, in terms of additional refinement, the maximum sound levels shall not occur between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m., Monday through Saturday, and shall not be allowed on Sunday. And so this is just suggesting that there should be a day where you tend to have residents in mixed-use areas, or they tend to be home, especially on Sundays, relaxing more. And then for the residential uses that are directly adjacent, whether to the side or above a commercial use in an adjoining wall or floor ceiling, the maximum sound levels should not occur on Saturday and Sunday and on weekends between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. So again, we're looking at this particular setting of adjoining walls and ceilings as being the most sensitive and needing an additional level of regulation and control or limitation. And so we share this with you for your feedback and discussion, and any other questions or comments you might have related to this ordinance.
Tim, what if they come in and want to, like, do the improvements with some type of sound barrier? I mean, I get the fact that, you know, our ordinance is our ordinance, we need to live by that, but
Yes,
just thinking so that they could come down to that decimal level or below.
that is addressed, that's a great comment. And in the specific uses, so this is a limitation in the mixed-use ordinance itself. We have specific to the land uses, limitations that suggest that you could exceed 85 decibels if you mitigate that same increase of, if you mitigate that same additional sound increase. So if you go to 95 decibels, you would mitigate it so that it's that same 85 decibel at the property boundary. So I believe that would still apply. And again, once you, to operate those maximum sound levels that you could mitigate to not exceed the 85, but the machines themselves might operate at, say, 100, mitigate it down, but these hours, these limiting hours would still apply
Right.
in a mixed-use zone.
So, thanks for all the time you guys spent with me on this, but there's one that I brought up that's currently in our ordinance that is a conflict with the land use table. And that is, under the general specific design guidelines, general requirements, number C, all uses located in the zoning district shall be conducted entirely within a fully enclosed building. And I brought up before, I don't know how you do that in a charter school or a college or university. I mean, there are things in here, a park, that the use, you don't have a school without a playground, or you don't have a park confined inside of a building. They're permitted uses within these areas, but they can't be confined to a building. And even though our ordinance says that in the zoning district, all uses need to be confined to a building. So does that, while this ordinance is open, does that need to be looked at? Because some uses either need to be taken out off the land use table, or that wording is somewhat not exactly correct.
Well, thank you. That's a good question, and our general thoughts here are that the primary use, being the indoor use, would prevail, and outdoor use would be more secondary and accessory to that primary use. So if there's any additional need for specific language, we could.
Well, just in a school, what do? Keep the kids indoors all day? Because the ordinance specifically says that all uses shall be conducted entirely within a building. And if a charter school can be done there and it's a permitted use, do those children have to stay indoors all day because they need to be outdoors some of the day? And so I think in my mind, there's a conflict with that particular, it's in both the MU and the MUTO do the exact same wording. with some of the uses that we have listed as permitted.
I think on those specific uses, like Tim said, there would be some where, you have a school that primarily indoors, they're most of the time they're going to be indoors. They're going to have recess or whatever outside playtime. And those would be uses that we would recognize would be exceptional in that zone. That's something, though, if we do need to, what we'd suggest is that we're going to be making some comprehensive changes to our mixed-use ordinance in the next few months, and that's something we could specifically address in that change. We haven't had a lot of applications in the mixed-use zones where you'd have those types of issues come up yet. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but I think we could address those. For now, we'd recognize that, especially on a school, that obviously there's going to be some outdoor recreational space. That also applies to, in a mixed-use zone, to things like outdoor amenity space. We know that's going to be used outdoors, but primarily the use is indoors, though. That's where we'd talk about that a little bit. But I think that's a good clarification as we go through that comprehensive look at our mixed use. And we're going to be looking at, we've got the home occupation standards, but what we've found as we've gone through the home occupation analysis is that mixed use zones are going to have to operate a little bit differently with that home occupation because of the live-work units and other things. So we're going to be bringing that forward for a comprehensive look, and we could address that then.
Satisfied for now?
When you look at your decibels, you got 85 dBs, and that's at property end.
Correct, so let's just look at this language. When operated, machines and instruments shall not emit a noise level greater than 85 decibels. Now, so it's the machine itself is 85 decibels, but then there should not be detectable vibration, dust, odor, fumes, or gas beyond the boundary of the property. So that's in addition to the 85 decibels.
Yeah, but you're saying at property level. You're not talking about the machine, because most machines are going to emit more than well, I shouldn't say most.
Well, a hairdryer's 90.
Some are, but are you talking about at the property end?
For the noise, it's from the machine,
From the machine?
whereas additional dust, odor, fumes, or gas
Yeah, that's
should not be
different.
detectable
That's different. That's,
at the boundary.
you can smell it, see it, but hear it?
And just to clarify, this is just for that light commercial flex manufacturing use. So if you're in an industrial zone and
Yeah.
that's going to be a different
Yeah.
story there.
But what about, I run a saw, that's more than 85 dBs. There's no getting around it in my little wood shop.
True. So, and lawn mowers and different tools and
Oh, yeah.
implements.
Lawnmowers for sure.
And so it's similar to the home occupation that Chad was sharing, in that there can be home hobbies, but it starts to become a business and a profession and operate more continuously throughout a day. And particularly in a mixed-use area, when you have the potential for units above
Yeah.
or directly adjacent, we look to have a more measurable and, specific control in place.
Okay.
It's a good comment, thank you.
Any others? Okay, thank you, Tim.
You bet, thank you.
Okay, that means we'll move on to item number 6, which Chad will cover again, and that's the rezone request.
Madam Mayor? I'm not required to do so by law, but I am, with wanting no appearance of bias, I have signed a contract to have a home built right in this Mary Meadows area. And so I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion, both in the work session after speaking with Gary, from the discussion and the debate and the vote. And Gary's told me that I need to step in the back until that's completed. So I'll do it here, and then I'll announce it again when we have the vote in the regular session.
Thank you.
Sure.
So
Because I was
Along-
going to say that there could be other conflicts in.
along the same line, I will disclose at this time that I do know Alex Hines. I've done business with Hines and Company for my whole entire life on the onion business. They pack and sell our onions, and we do rent a farm from them. However, this piece of property I feel has no conflict of interest It's a different piece of property. It has nothing to do with the other business, so I don't think there's a conflict in my opinion. But I will disclose that, and I have had, after our last training minute, I have had a few discussions with Alex on this. Nothing that won't be brought out here in the meeting, I'm sure, just kind of procedures and how it works here and some things like that. So if there is something, I'll make sure it's known.
Okay, thank you for being truthful there. Anyone else have a conflict of interest or?
Not with this.
Well, just, I'm going to be really brief. This will, again, show up as an item in our regular agenda too, but just to give a brief background, the request is from rezone from CP1 to M2. The property is shown there on the slide. This is a close-up view of that. In the original notice, we had a little bit of confusion about this little property being included. It's not. It's a separate property. It's not an issue as far as the noticing and things, but we just wanted to make sure that that was clear that this is not part. It's just this part in that black outline. Again, the change request is from CP1 to M2. CP1 is a lighter commercial area. M2 is our heavy industrial zone that's outlined in our code. It allows a variety of industrial uses. This was reviewed by staff and by the Planning Commission. Just to go through kind of a history of the property, just by photos, you can kind of see that existing building there in 75, some agricultural use around the perimeter. You can kind of see that begins to change a little bit as we go later in time. 2006, we have a little bit of an expansion. The area kind of stays consistent, but we start to get some paved or gravel areas that are added to the site as we get to 2010 and then 2014 and 20. I'll come back to those photos in just a minute, but I want to talk about the general plan designation for the property. This is the general plan designation. It's general plan for future residential. This was part of that general plan review process. As part of that general plan review process, we acknowledged some of the surrounding uses. The Mary's Meadow subdivision that was mentioned just a few minutes ago is surrounding to the north and east of the property. We've got some new homes being built across the street from this parcel. And this parcel itself is general planned eventually for residential. I wanted to just briefly indicate, though, that while it is general plan, the existing zoning can remain as long as the applicant would like. Staff is not requiring that this goes to residential anytime soon. This would be at the applicant's discretion to change that zone. The general plan designation, though, does indicate if things were to change, it should transition to residential. I want to just go back for just a minute now. Actually, I'm going to just bring up really briefly a table of uses. And I think I already had that open, but it's not showing up for whatever reason. But this is the table of uses for the various zones. And I wanted to point out that CP1 just by itself has a number of uses that are allowed and everything. So CP1 is, if you count over 1, 2, 3, 4 from that break right there, that black line, that's the CP1 uses. So as we track that down, you can see all the uses that are permitted in the CP1 zone. Some of these are kind of community and residentially related, but as we get into the commercial uses, everything with a C and a P by it are things that could be allowed in the CP1 zone. So there's a number of uses that are allowed currently in that zone. Some that aren't, based on just the impacts and the type of zone that it is. One thing I wanted to mention, this table that I'm showing you right now is actually the list of uses that we're proposing to be added to the CP1 zone. So tonight, we've talked about this land use table, and there's a number of uses that are not allowed currently that we would propose would be allowed in the CP1. This would expand the types of uses that could be on the property. Notably, one of those is light commercial flex manufacturing. That would give some additional use for light manufacturing, indoor type manufacturing on the site, not currently allowed. Another one that's notable is our e-commerce fulfillment and e-commerce retail use. But as you go down there, you can see other uses. Some of these uses that show up as being crossed off are actually still allowed. They're just being consolidated as we consolidate our retail uses into one. So again, you can see there's a lot of uses that are allowed there on that CP1 property. And certainly those uses could be allowed going forward. There's nothing that would stop an applicant from coming forward and requesting to use the property for one of these allowed conditionally or permitted uses on the property. Just briefly, we're going to spend some time in the regular meeting on this item as well, so I just want to go back to the slideshow and again show the general plan designation. This is really, I guess, the crux of staff's analysis, is that we have our general plan, that this is an area that was general plan to eventually transition to residential. We've got surrounding land use that has been approved kind of based on this scenario of this property eventually transitioning to residential use over time. Staff looked at that, looked at the allowed uses in the M2 zone, and just found, again, this is an application for a zone change. So it's not just about one use, it's about all the uses that are permitted in a particular zone. We found that those uses that are allowed in the M2 zone are just not compatible with the surrounding uses and those that are existing and proposed in that area, and that that the CP1 could continue to remain compatible, continue to have those uses that would be compatible with those surrounding land uses. So with that, we recommended denial of the request for the zone change. The Planning Commission reviewed this at their last meeting, and or 2 meetings ago, and also recommended that the City Council deny this request for zone change from CP1 to M2. So give some additional details in the regular meeting, but that's in a nutshell, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
I have some questions, but I can wait till the regular meeting as well,
Okay.
in the interest of time.
My question is so we're talking about permitted uses in the zone. One of the things. Second, the general plan. It's my understanding that the applicant or the owner of the of the property wants to have some sort of storage. Is that the crux of this? It's a storage issue?
My understanding is how this began was there was some uses that approached the city for business license approval for one was an RV storage, sales, rental type use that's not allowed in the CP1 zone. And other types of uses would be that approached us either through phone calls or inquiries, contractor storage yard type uses, which again are not allowed in the CP1 zone. So that's kind of, I think, what started this conversation with some of these folks that had asked about establishing their business at the property, and we had to tell them no because it wasn't allowed in the zone. So in terms of, that's what started the conversation from our standpoint. I know outdoor storage has been mentioned a lot in the last couple of hearings, whether or not, I will mention that outdoor storage is not just a default use. Outdoor storage is a use that's established. It's something that is called out as a separate use in the code. You have to get approval for outdoor storage. It's not just a default for the property. So that's, again, never been approved for this property that we have record of. So that, again, it's a use type. It's not just a default to outdoor storage.
I guess I guess we'll talk about it more in the regular meeting. But my thought is, you showed the pictures of the over time, and here's a business that's been here forever. And so I'm sympathetic to someone who's a group, a family who has done business here for a long, long time. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure.
And this is certainly no reflection on the business, the Heinz Onions or anything like that. I want to make a distinction though between the building and the business. So the businesses are approved. They change over time. We've had a number of different businesses in this building. The building's been there, but the businesses have changed, and we have had approvals for this property that have specifically addressed outdoor storage. In fact, they've prohibited it. So that's something that, again, it falls into not the building, but a business approval for that lot. And we'll go through this in the meeting, but it's been zoned CP1 for quite some time.
And second, and then we can move on if that's what we want to do, is when we were approving the general plan, the update, the final piece to that was the town center on 2200 West. There was an issue with the land that was already set for apartments, zoned for that, yet it wasn't part of the general plan. It was still zoned town center, and so that there was a discussion about that. It was tabled until there was the new purple section put on the general plan for that. And so I look at the general plan as, yes, it's how we want the city to look. We've gone through the process, but at the same time, it's still it's a living document. And so that's kind of how I look at it as well. So hopefully we'll have this discussion in the next meeting, but that's where I'm coming from tonight.
Yeah, certainly, we would agree with that it is a living document. I think in this case, we have decisions that have been made, land use decisions surrounding this property that would lend it to not having a heavy industrial use or the ability to have a heavy industrial use in that location. We've got homes being built across the street, both east and north. So I think we have to take into account, while it is a living document, circumstances have changed over the past few years where we have residential that's establishing around that property. So,
You're not gonna change anything on that CP1, are you? Because you talked about
no, other than
tonight you
to,
were gonna make some changes in
the changes
zoning.
would be to increase the number of uses that they could have to allow additional uses,
Okay,
but not take anything away, yeah.
but you'll let us know if you're gonna increase on that CP1?
Yeah, those are in that land use table that I showed. It's part of that land use table amendment, and there's a number of uses
Okay,
that
and
we've added.
The
to
ones in red, I assume.
I think they're green, but yes, whatever color
green.
they are on there, yeah.
Sure, I'm colorblind.
The red ones went away, but were identified, I guess, more with the
Okay.
language, right?
Yeah, they're all identified there through either strike-through or other text.
Okay, any other questions on this?
And again, just maybe to answer your question, we're not seeking to change the zoning to anything, but,
Right,
it can remain CP1
Sure.
as long as the applicant would like it
but
to
you're
be.
talking about changing CP1.
CP1 will have added uses, yeah,
Yeah.
additional uses,
Yeah,
yeah.
additional.
Yep.
Okay.
So Chad, I just have one thing, and this is just, I'm sure it's a cut and paste error. But in the engineer report from Shannon, under the subject, it has the address at 1370 West Gentile. But if you read the report itself, she has the address of 1 acre at approximately 2200 East, 3050 North.
Yeah, I think
So
you're,
I think
think
it's
you're
probably
right. I
a
think
cut and
that's a-
paste error, but there is a discrepancy in her report with address.
okay, thank you. Anything else?
Good catch. Okay,
Okay,
okay, all right. Thank you, Chad. Woo. Okay, we can skip over I've got one report, but since you're there, let's go ahead and go down to your,
I can wait too, Mayor. If you want me to step aside and do your report, that's fine.
the only thing I was gonna apprise the council on under the mayor's report is in the COG meeting. The discussion came up regarding the animal shelter. I know we all took a tour up there, and, they were pushing to have a special district on that. And the update there is the special district is not gonna happen, but they are still looking at alternatives as far as how they'll deal with the replacement of the building and the added services. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Okay, that's it on my report.
Thanks, Mayor. You want me to jump into the next one?
Yep.
We're gonna switch out a show here really quick. I'm gonna tag team with Lon on this one, but we wanted to give just a
Oh, yeah.
brief overview of our downtown.
We can hold on, we'll have Zach come back.
Oh,
One question
thank
in your
you.
report first while we're waiting then. So did they just give up the idea of the district?
I think there was a lot of opposition to it. So they realized that they needed to kind of rethink how they're going to go about it.
Okay, I'll jump in. The purpose of this is really to give some of our new council members that have maybe not been involved in some of these discussions an update on our downtown, on some of our redevelopment areas in our downtown. Lon's going to tag team with me here for just a moment, but we wanted to talk about some of the specific projects in our downtown, give you an update on those, talk generally about the RDA, what we've been doing in the downtown in terms of expenditure of RDA dollars over the past several years and what we have planned for the future. And then just, again, briefly talk about some additional opportunities there. So I'm going to turn the time over to Lon.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I've been asked to give a little history on the RDA area, especially for those who have not been here through this whole process. While this process began well before 2004, there was a lot of work done prior. The redevelopment plan was adopted in 2004. In 2007, there was a Layton downtown plan that laid the structure and really the direction for RDA as the city and the RDA preferred. Since that time, you can see what's occurred. We've seen about 82 million in valuation invested into the RDA, into the redevelopment area, which is pretty significant. You can see all the businesses that have moved in since that plan was adopted. Right here, there's a map to make that easy for you. You can see all the new businesses that have added value. That actually doesn't include the village at Fort Lane, so that'll be more valuation as well in the coming year. However, with that being said, this right here shows what our projected increment was, shown in blue, versus what our actual increment is, shown in green. There's several reasons for that, but it just hasn't amounted to what we had hoped it would when we originally adopted the plan and made those projections. The recession had a lot to do with that. There was significant investment that was projected for those first couple of years in the recession, and it hasn't seen that steep incline that we hoped it would. With that said, we know that we have some projects that will help, and we've been working on them for several years. And you can see right here the items we've been working on for as long as I've been here, 2.5 years. That's not a long time, and they've been worked on a few of those for a lot longer. We have the Winkle site shown there with number 1. The Triangle development, we have several names for that, but we'll use that for this one. Moda Parkway development, that's the apartments. JF Capital has recently submitted. The pedestrian overpass, that's been planned in the last couple of years. And then Main Street, in our discussions with UDOT, and some of you have seen those conceptual plans. Right here you can see the Moda development. They're proposing 248 units. This is actually not within the redevelopment area. However, this will affect, I think this will affect the redevelopment area with the rooftops. It should bring some more investment, which we've already seen taking place. Right here you can see approximate location of where they have provided a landing spot for the pedestrian overpass over the railroad track. Right here's the Winkle site. There's a lot of history on this project. You can see that there's several items of significance, which include acquisition of property. There was environmental remediation that took several years longer than we anticipated. They've removed property, buildings, as you can see in that photograph at the top. In the back there, those buildings are all removed other than Bill's Comfort Systems, which will be removed in the next, well, it'll have to be within the next year. Their agreement requires them to be occupied and operational in their new building on Antelope, and they'll have to vacate the building right here in the photograph, and then the Winkles have a certain amount of time to remove that building. And then there's the mobile homes, and you've heard a lot about that.
So Lon, does Winkle own Bill's Comfort System now, just waiting for that to be happen, or is that still have to be purchased by him?
From what I've been told, they own it, and they've given him a certain amount of time to vacate. Actually, it was a while ago, but they've allowed him to continue until he has his other building operational. That was the last information I was given when we had when I had the conversation with Mike Kay.
So Lon, since I don't really know on this, as far as the mobile homes are concerned, you know, when Clearfield did their project, they actually paid to move those people or help provide when they took that trailer court out on Main Street for their development. And then in that meeting that we were at the food bank, she made reference to in Centerville, they've done something similar, removed a mobile home park in which there wasn't anything done for the mobile home park, and those people are now seeking rental or homeless assistance of some kind. So what's the plan? Is there any assistance to help these people find other locations?
Well, right now, the developer's the property owner's the one that will be moving those people from the mobile home park. They would prefer that they keep them in one of their parks. In Clearfield, they actually hired somebody that does that professionally, and they were able to assist those people in moving. Outside of that, we're not involved at this point, and so the city doesn't have that funding in place.
How many units are there? Do you know?
About 70.
Because that just adds to then the shortage of, we already have a lag of affordable housing and that income. This is even going to make that issue even bigger if there's not assistance somewhere else.
Yep. Like I said, their plan is to move them into one of their parks, and they've been working hard for a couple of years all across the Wasatch Front. That's their intention, and I believe that's what they will do. But right now, that's entirely in their hands.
Excuse me, but what about environmental stuff?
That's
Because
complete.
you got a lot of gas and,
That's complete. They cleaned that up. It took
did
them
they?
about 7 years to clean that up, a lot longer than we thought. We received the letter of no further action from the the DEQ last January. And so the property has been cleared by them to construct.
whatever.
Yeah, there's some uses that are noted in there, but they've been cleared.
Good.
They removed quite a bit of soil and did a lot of testing. This right here shows you the amount of work that's gone into this property since 2002. Everything above the Green Davis School District is an agreement, and everything below that is mostly an action that needs to be completed by the developer. Oh, wait, I need to highlight the Davis School District remains in the RDA, which we certainly appreciate. That happened this past year, which was huge for this project. They were previously at 100%, they're now at 50%, but 50% is 50% better than zero, and we're very grateful. This list right here shows you the outstanding items. We made some projections to complete some projects that we were hoping for, such as the pedestrian overpass and Main Street's redevelopment. In order to obtain the increment needed to pay for those items, this is kind of the schedule as far as what they would have to complete. Right now, we're happy to say that they're under a development agreement with a pretty well-known developer. We expect to see their first submittal here in the next little bit. We're in communication with them a lot. And so that's a huge step, and we're pretty happy about that. This was what was proposed about a year and a half ago. $200 to $220 million investment. This right here, which you've seen before, is just a conceptual plan of what we think Main Street could look like. And we know that this is obtainable if we're able to reach the numbers that we projected, which are basically the numbers that they provided in their estimated investment. This right here is the budget that you saw a year ago or 6 months ago when we amended the budget, but also when we were working with the school district. This shows the cost of what we anticipated for those projects. About $16 million, that was our goal. Right here, this is what was presented to the district. And at 50%, if they construct $200 million worth of taxable property, then we project that we'll be able to reach that goal and make those improvements. And with that said, I think there's further discussion in another meeting.
Very good.
Just one question, quick, Lon. The trailer courts always seems to be the hang-up, but are they coming forward with those plans with the trailer court still a problem, or?
They're actually working on some things. They've actually purchased some property that they hope to move them to. That's as much information as we have right now. The developer they're working with actually has experience with this, and so that's helpful. We're optimistic. You'll be informed as soon as we're able to inform you.
Thank you.
Right, thanks.
Are there any other questions about anything that Lon presented? We do want to have a discussion about a proposal that we'd like to request a closed session discussion to discuss purchase of real property, and we'd like to recommend that the council convene that closed meeting so we can have that discussion.
Okay. I'm going to say in the interest of time and knowing that I'd like to stay on schedule with our council meeting, I would propose that we actually move item number 9, which is a proposal to go into a closed-door meeting after our council meeting. Are you guys fine with that? Because obviously we don't want to rush this and cut it short, so. You guys good with that? Okay. So Chad will wait until after our council meeting. Okay. So that pretty much brings our work meeting to a close. So council will adjourn at this point. We'll close this meeting and then reconvene here in less than 8 minutes. Thank you. And just as a reminder, preferably that you're spreading out unless you can sit by each other if you're in the same household. So, thank you. Okay. All right. As I mentioned before, I would like to welcome everyone out to our City Council meeting November 19th, 2020 at 7:01 p.m. We start our meetings out with a prayer and a pledge. And Mr. Morris and I have been bouncing back and forth because we kind of helped one another. So I'll go ahead and take over tonight, and we'll start this meeting with our Pledge of Allegiance, and then I'll have a prayer. So please stand. Okay, repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our Father in heaven, we'd like to bow our heads this evening on behalf of this great city of Layton and ask Thee to please bless all of our residents, that they may all be safe and that we can obey by the rules and be able to try to mitigate this virus that is amongst us. We pray this evening that Thou will also watch over this council, that Thou will allow their minds to be open and fresh and be able to hear the concerns and the information that is brought before them so that they can make a good, accurate decision on the benefits of this city. We are grateful this time of year. We're thankful for all that we've been blessed with, and especially to live in a great city and to be able to have the services that we have for the protection of all of our first responders, as well as our public works and staff folks that are willing to work around the clock for us to keep us all safe and healthy. We ask Thee please to bless this great nation as well as our state, that there may be some peace and calmness come upon us. We're grateful again for the land that is provided for us and the abundance of good weather as well as water, and we're thankful for these things in Thy name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, I'd like to call our meeting to order again. At this time, Council, we do have some minutes that we need to approve, so I'll look for a motion on that.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adopt the minutes of Layton City Council work meeting August 6, 2020, and minutes of Layton City Council work meeting August 20, 2020.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or changes? Okay, seeing that there's none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, municipal events. Mr. Thomas, would you like to reemphasize what you spoke earlier?
All are canceled except for the lighting ceremony. I don't know the day. It's Monday. Excuse me for not knowing what day it is, or I mean what the date is. But this Monday, and it'll be held right out here.
Yeah, at 7 p.m. And quite honestly, it's not really. I mean, the lights will be turned on.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a big event like we've had in the past.
No, it's not a big event at all. It's just something that they can light the lights up all at one time, and then it's a free-for-all, whatever you want to do.
I will let you know that given the fact that we're dealing with unusual circumstances this year, and that in the past this has been obviously a huge event for the elementary kids, we did have a coloring contest, and we've had those students or anyone within our city that wanted to submit a color. God, I'm trying to think. That submitted one of our coloring contests, or our coloring, long story short, what we're going to do is we still want to include the kids, or I do. And so anybody who submitted a paper what they'll do is the Parks and Rec will select one winner, and we'll give them a call Monday, and they'll be able to come down, and we're going to actually have them flip the switch with me. So that I am trying to kind of be cognizant of the fact that this is unusual time of year, but yet we'd like to have those kids be excited as well as us, so that it gives us an opportunity to enjoy the festivities of the season.
So is there an event at all with it, or what's going to happen?
So what's going to happen is, like I said, we'll choose a winner on Monday. They'll come down, and as a council, you're welcome to be there. It will be at 7 p.m. And quite honestly, I mean, the residents can show up. The only thing is we'd like them to socially distance. And I believe the Parks and Rec are going to look at maybe live streaming this so that folks can see it live streamed on Facebook. But
Is
that's
the hot
really
chocolate and that kind of stuff next, or?
Yep. And unfortunately, there will be there won't be any hot chocolate sales this year.
This is a BYO, okay?
But you are welcome. We do encourage you to get out of your cars and walk around, though, because it is a different setting when you do walk through the park. So that is an option throughout the season.
Well, and maybe get your hot chocolate at one of our local businesses around. That would be really, really supportive of them if you, after Christmas lights, go visit one of them.
All right. So that's really about it for our municipal announcements at this time. And I do not have any verbal petitions, so I'll move right into our citizens' comments. So this is a portion of our meeting that anyone wishing to bring up an item before the council here that is not on our agenda, you're welcome to. You can step to either side of the diocese here and speak into the mic, give your name and number, or name and address, excuse me, for the record. So the time's now yours.
Hello, Madam Mayor, City Council members. I was here last time we met. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again. My name is Daniel Denhalter. I live at 233 Cold Creek Way. I'm just coming to bring it up for the attention, trying to be the squeaky wheel. The incredible amount of speeding and ignoring of legal limits and signage on the road of Cold Creek Way as you're passing through. There's a four-way stop there that's blown through regularly. In fact, I've been putting up my Christmas lights, and today alone I saw about 4 or 5, and one of them almost hit a kid on a bike crossing the road. So it's becoming an imminent problem, and I honestly am just afraid that it might turn into something more serious, and the reaction from the City Council would be incredibly appreciated in that regard. This street has access to 3 different parks. It's frequented by over a few hundred kids as they travel to and from school. There are 2 schools on this road as well. And yes, it does cross a busy street as well, but that street is lit and it has signs, and all these parents rushing their kids back and forth from trying to get them dropped off. Just creates a place of chaos, and the road is dangerous, and being on the corner of it and having a couple kids myself, it's fearful, and it's hard to let them out to enjoy the last little bit of sunshine that we have of the year. So just wanted to bring it up again, and I think you'll see me for a while until the whole thing. But thank you, and thank you guys for all that you do.
So currently there are 0 speed limit signs on that street. And that's what you're asking, is that we actually look
And
at posting a
possibly some way of-
speed limit.
In some way of possibly controlling the speed. I don't know if bumps are allowed or anything like that. Just honestly looking for a solution, begging actually for a solution, and whatever we can do.
Daniel, have they come out and brought the trailer out to do a survey or anything?
So I've only been in my home for a little over a year, but according to the residents, they've done that multiple times. We've had police presence there, sitting hidden on a little side street with no avail. One of the big problems is it went from being a yield sign to a stop sign, which doesn't help the situation. But as I was kind of telling you guys last time, about 3 weeks ago, there was a side-by-side race because the street is extra wide. of cars just flying by as fast as they possibly could. I could just imagine someone losing control and hitting one of the many young children that live in that neighborhood. So this is me again, just pleading with you guys, trying to find a solution. And like I said, I'll probably come and attend your meetings for a little while, hoping for something. So
Daniel, I can imagine that some of these people are your neighbors.
yeah,
Has there has been an outreach as far as the neighborhood goes, a Facebook page, some sort of a, hey, let's take care of each other down here?
so we've reached out within the HOA system, but
perfect.
unfortunately it's split between two HOAs. So we've asked our group to communicate with their group, and unfortunately it's the other group that has the teenagers and some things that are always going to be a little bit present. And they tend to fly down that road since it's the main thoroughfare, and then turn into their area. So even though they have multiple points of access into their area as well. So yes, we've tried reaching out. I've even, as much as I've driven and tried to kindly ask some of the parents of these families to slow down. That doesn't usually go well. So, but I try my best to be courteous and have that conversation. We have a Facebook group that we are constantly posting things on and try to communicate it that way, but really nothing is happening. So that's why, aside from that and aside from the police force, which has been phenomenal and very responsive, I'm coming to the city council because I'm out of options. And I would love your help in trying to find a healthy solution to slow the flow. It's not been, I don't think the posting, because I think they know it's residential.
Right.
If there was some way to actually force a slower speed, I don't know if that's possible on that road. I've seen humps or dips, or I don't know, just something to discourage those who would use it as a raceway. So
Yeah. The easiest thing is put a 2x4 in your yard and throw it out.
the police officers have discouraged me from
Well,
putting
they have,
anything into
and
the road.
I've had talks with them too. One thing, just so you know, I'm not, Gary, I believe bumps, they're not allowed because of fire engines, is that right?
Snow plows.
Alex?
Snow plows biggest thing.
Snow plows, yeah. So that, and I'm not saying there's a ton of ways to try.
Yeah.
The thing is that we need to look at maybe trying. you
Yeah,
know.
I know there's other places in Layton that have like an irrigation dips, and they're used as irrigation dips more than
Right.
speed limits, but it
Yeah,
does.
they've got
help
all the
slow
little lines on the other side of where the cars hit, yeah.
Right.
The oil pan, which is not a bad idea.
It's not that I want to cause damage to anyone else, but I would love to discourage
No,
the speed.
yeah,
So,
Okay.
but yeah, I'm just asking, like I said,
Right.
and not to take up more of the council's time, but thank you guys for hearing my petition and my plea and my beg. So thank you very much.
Okay.
So Mayor,
Yes.
or Alex, I know I've seen a time or two here and there where they'll put a blinking light on the top of the stop sign for a little more notice. Is that a possibility, or what would be the options? Speed limit sign too, if it's not there.
Well, typically, we don't put a speed limit sign in our residential areas because it's a given throughout the entire city that it is a 25-mile-an-hour post. But obviously, enforcement, maybe stronger enforcement, meaning tickets, not just having the presence, so that word spreads that they are ticketing here, they are watching, as well as, like Councilman Day pointed out, the blinking lights on the stop sign. And then if that doesn't work, I would really like to try my idea as far as grooving the pavement so that gives you that ripple. So similar like when you're on the freeway and you veer to the right and you get that da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, I'd really like to see that maybe as a test. I've mentioned it before up on Antelope Drive, possibly looking at it there, but this might be an area also that we could test that with, or I know you're just going to check into it and see, but I think those are some options. I will tell you, we have had some discussions, so it's not going on deaf ears. Okay, thank you very much.
So
Okay,
I
we'll
would
move-
say a speed limit sign too.
The speed
We
limit?
have them in residential areas all over.
Yeah, we could, but I mean, obviously, that's,
Yeah.
I'd rather see us start ticketing. Get the word, let them know that this is a residential area and we mean business. So,
Yeah.
Well, it's easier to ticket if you got a sign that says that.
Okay, all right. Anybody else in the audience that would like to have a comment? And Gary, I will verify, we are watching online as well, right? I mean, anybody who wanted comments earlier could have given them to our attention before 3 o'clock, correct? And at this point, we have not received any. So I'm going to go ahead and move on then. Okay. Council, let's move on to our consent items. And just for those in the audience, these are items that are routine in nature, and we can enact upon them in a single motion. So knowing that, we have 2 items on this agenda. So I'll start out with our first one, which is a state utility license agreement between Layton City and the Utah Department of Transportation. And our city attorney, Gary Crane, will be presenting that for us.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Pull this off. Resolution 20-69 is a resolution just readopting a resolution that's an agreement that's adopted every 5 years between Layton City and the Department of Transportation, Utah Department of Transportation, which allows us to be able to access their right-of-way in order to, if we need to put a light in, if we need to put everything behind the curb, we're responsible for. So we often have to go into their right-of-way in order to install improvements or gain an access or that type of thing. They have some rules. Those rules, one of those rules require that we sign an agreement with them, which covers insurance, which covers the permitting, which covers various aspects of our making application to get into their rights-of-way. Every 5 years, this has to be renewed, and usually it's renewed before December of the 5th year. And this has been I think the last time was 2015, of course, and so this is December of 2020. And so that's what this is all about. Any questions on the agreement? It's pretty much the same agreement that they gave us last time. It's just 5 years older. So.
Council, did you have any questions on that? Okay, very good. Seeing that there's none, we'll have you go on to the second item, since you'll be handling that as well.
Thank you, Mayor. The second item is up on your screen. Brody Robinson and his wife have built a home on a single lot. And the lot, you can see the lot is kind of elongated. It's, I think it's 3 acres. I'm not sure what the total acreage is, but you've got a single home on it. It accesses off of 100. You can see the drive approach there. Thank you very much for highlighting that. This piece of property was actually annexed into the city, if you remember, a little short time ago. And at that time, you remember we talked about annexation agreements. So the Robinsons actually signed an annexation agreement which provided for an access all the way over to the property to the, I guess that's to the north, if it were to be oriented correctly. So 100 all the way over to the property line in front of their house. There's an easement which belongs to the city, which would provide for access to that property, which the property has limited access. The property on the north side has limited access. There were a number of other things that we provided for in that agreement, including access down south, if there ever is a subdivision there or ever are additional lots. That street to the south, or to the, I guess it would be to the east, is also provided for. In this particular situation, what has happened is, and by the way, that property to the north, that big long blank piece sitting beside the Robinson property, is outside of the city limits. They would have to apply for annexation, is what they'd have to do. That is in the county. But nonetheless, we thought that we would provide for right-of-way through there eventually in the future so that the property could not be landlocked. In the meantime, the Robinsons have requested the ability to be able to build just a circular drive in front of their home to be able to provide for guests and parking and that type of thing. It is bigger than your regular circular drive or your regular turnaround, and in fact is not the fire turnaround. The fire turnaround is a little bit further to the south. Right there is the access for fire turnaround. So this is beyond the fire turnaround and is actually it would be a private drive there until such time as the property abutting it develops. At that time, the question arises always, who's going to remove the improvements and put in allow for the new improvements to be put in. So if the property that is currently vacant decides it wants to develop, they can use our easement, because we've got the easement, the city has an easement for a street through there. They would have to pay for the improvements, but the removal of the drive approach would be up to the Robinsons. They would have to remove the drive approach to allow for that street to go through. They've agreed to do that. That's what this agreement is all about. We're coming back to you, just indicating that they will remove that drive approach once that property to the north actually ends up in developing. And so that's what, it's kind of a brief explanation of what this agreement is about. It's actually would be an amendment to the previous agreement that we had, the annexation agreement that we have. Any questions that you might have on the turnaround? I know that they want to maintain this pretty much as horse property. They're going to put a barn behind the home, and they're going to allow horses to be maintained on both the lot, just to the west of the house and also to the south. So it's really just a very, very large estate lot is what it is right now.
So the question I have, Gary, is just a clarification, I guess. They would be responsible to tear it out. Now, who would have to put the main road in, them or the lot to the west? The
Whoever
big lot?
develops. If the Robinsons develop the property further, then they would have to, if they wanted to put another lot, for example, on the other side, across from their home, they would have to develop that street. And if they wanted to put further lots down to the east, I'd call it to the east towards that other small street, they would have to put in the improvements. However, if the vacant property decides they want to develop first and put a number of lots in there, they would be responsible for making that connection. The Robinsons have already provided, if you're aware, when you do a new subdivision and you're only putting a house on one side, you pretty much put 26 feet of asphalt in, curb gutter and park strip on that side of the street that you're developing on. The Robinsons have actually decided to go ahead and complete the entire width of the street all the way up to the total width of their frontage, which would be about 90 feet. So that street will be completed, everything will be completed on that street up to the 90 feet of frontage that the Robinsons needed for their home. If the vacant property decides it wants to develop, it's only fair that they pay for the improvements the rest of the way. The utilities will also come to that edge of that 90 feet edge of their lot. But whoever develops would have to, that's typical, would have to bring in the improvements.
Okay.
That makes sense? Okay.
So Gary, the home sits south of 100 South, so the lot north of that, who owns that, or has that been annexed into the county too, or it's just the property to the west that has not been annexed?
Oh, okay, so the long parcel has not been annexed.
Okay, so
Long
that's to
piece.
the west. So the property to the north, on the other side of that,
That's his.
that's
as well.
theirs as well.
That will be pasture.
Okay. All right. I just had a hard time finding this because the address doesn't exist
Right.
yet, and it took me somewhere else. So.
I think there is, you got the inlet there, but you don't
Yeah,
have
but it takes you to the other 100 South that's up
Oh.
closer to Gentile when you Google it, and it's like, this can't be right. So.
plus Google. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, seeing that there's no other questions there, council, I'll look for a motion then or action on our consent items, A and B.
Mayor, I move that we accept the license agreement between Layton City and UDOT with the resolution 2069, as well as accept the agreement between Brody and Jessica Robinson and Layton City with resolution 20-70 for the entitled improvement.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Those pass unanimously. Okay, we'll move on down to our public hearing portion of our meeting, which we have 3 items here, and all 3 items will be presented by Mr. Chad Wilkinson, our Development Director. So Chad, go ahead and start with item number A.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. This first item is a request for zone change from A, which is agricultural zone, and PB, professional office, to CTH, which is our condo townhome zone. The address of the property is 682 North Fairfield. Here's an approximate location in the city there, shown by the red star on the map. About 1.2 acres is this request. This is a copy of our general plan, which identifies this property within a mixed-use corridor. So you can see the town center there at Gordon and Fairfield. Then you can see this mixed-use corridor that goes along Fairfield to the south. That property is right there where that blue star is, and within that mixed-use corridor along Fairfield. Here's a aerial photo of the property. You can see the existing zoning kind of underneath the cross-hatching there. That's the agricultural piece. There's a small piece that's also subject of a property line adjustment right there on that corner. That little piece is zoned PB. It's part of an existing dental office property right now. They would be proposing to take that portion of the property, include it with this property through a property line adjustment that has been approved and will be recorded subject to this zone change request being approved by the council, if you choose to approve it. That's really it. The Planning Commission reviewed this item. It is consistent with the general plan, as you saw on that other map. It's on that mixed-use corridor where CTH is one of the conforming zones within that corridor. In addition, surrounding uses, as you can see on the aerial photo, you have townhomes to the south, townhomes to the north. There's an intervening dentist office, dental practice right there between those two, but certainly within that mixed-use corridor and consistent with the general plan. And the Planning Commission did recommend approval. We're also recommending that the council approve ordinance 20-36, which would change the zoning of this property from A, agricultural, and PB, professional office, to CTH. Be happy to answer any questions if I can.
So I have one, and it's in the staff notes. So it says that the lot line adjustment to obtain approximately 0.02 acres or 2,000 square feet of the adjacent 704 North Fairfield property to be used as common space at the northwest corner of the future development site. I think that's the northeast corner, or are we talking a different location?
That's a good catch. That's a typo. It should be northeast corner.
Keep you on your toes, Chad.
She does. We're grateful for it.
That's good.
Any other questions from the council?
Any discussion you have on here? Okay, go ahead and, excuse me, Chad, go ahead and present item B, which is the rezone request as well.
Aren't you going to take
We'll have a
public comment on
hearing
this
for
one?
this item first.
Well, okay. Okay, then council would, okay, sorry. Yeah, that works, but I do need to open it, so I'll look for a motion to open our public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion that we open the public hearing for the rezone request at 682 North Fairfield.
Very good.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. So, we now are open for any type of public comment. Is there anyone from the audience that wish to speak regarding the rezone request of item number A, which is 682 North Fairfield? Okay, seeing that there's none, we'll go ahead and move on to item B. Correct?
Just vote on
Do you want us to make a decision? So you got me totally confused now. All right. Yeah, because I was going to say, that's not what you discussed earlier. All right. Yeah. Right, okay. Okay. So, seeing that there's no further discussion on item number A, the rezone request, council will look for some action on this particular item. I need a motion. So that we can vote
I'll
on
make
it.
a motion, Madam Mayor. It's kind of sad because this is one of the first homes that my dad built way back when he started building homes. And when I told him it was here for a rezone, he was kind of heartbroken. But I'll make the motion that we approve the rezone as outlined. It is ordinance 2036.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Being that this is a rezone request, I'll do a roll call vote on this. So I'll start with Councilmember Thomas.
Yep.
That's a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Morris?
Aye.
Councilmember Fitzpatrick?
Aye.
Councilmember Bloxham?
Aye.
Councilmember Day?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll move on to item number B.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I have, as I mentioned in the work council meeting, I am contractually obligated to purchase a home in the development that's subject due north to the rezone request.
Mhm.
So while I'm not required to recuse myself by law, with respect to the applicant and with hoping to not have any sort of appearance of bias, I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion, the debate, and the vote on this item and rejoin the council as we finish.
Thank you there.
Madam Mayor, I will as well repeat the same disclosure. I don't think there's a conflict of interest in my part on this, so I won't recuse myself, but I will disclose that I do business with the applicant in a separate business, and that's the onion packing shed up the road, but it has nothing to do with this building or this decision here. I also disclose that I have had multiple discussions with him on this application, but nothing that shouldn't be brought up here, and nothing that should conflict anything, more along procedures and things like that.
Okay, thank you for that disclosure. Does anybody else have any type of disclosure? Okay.
I
seeing
will
that-
disclose also that I rent ground from him on the farm, which also has nothing to do with this piece of property or this part of his business.
Okay, thank you. Go
Okay.
ahead and proceed.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, members of the council. This is, again, another rezone request. The request this time is to change the zoning from CP1, which is a planned neighborhood commercial zone, to M2, which is our heavy manufacturing zone, industrial zone in the city. The property is located at 1370 West Gentile, as shown on the map there, and with the red star above it. You can see that property. This is a closer view of the property. With the property in question outlined, there was some error in previous staff report that included this property. That's a separate property not included in this request. The requested acreage is about 1 acre. There's a 6,000 square foot or so building there located on the property. It has some parking to the east, and you can kind of see that hopefully through the aerial photo. That cross-hatching is blocking that a little bit. Excuse me, but I will show some other photos where you can see that. These are some historical photos of the property. Building's been around for a long time. This shows some surrounding agricultural use of the property surrounding, slightly smaller kind of footprint of the area for the building and the surrounding use. As the years progress, that area increases a little bit. You can still see maybe a smaller parking area here on the east of the building. Increased a little bit at 2010. 2010 is a significant year related to the property because that was when the conditional use permit that currently exists on the property was approved with a number of conditions that we can talk about in just a few minutes. This is again 2014, kind of showing some of that same. You can see some additional parking on the east side. You've got some materials stored there on the north side of the building in this photo. And this is the current aerial photo. Got to clear my throat. Excuse me. So, I'm good now. Thanks, Ken. Again, this is an aerial photo without any of the zoning laid on top of it. You can see that significantly in the last couple of years, we've had the development of Mary's Meadows subdivision that surrounds now on the north and east sides of the building, residential lots being constructed on the east side of this road and on the north side of the road, directly adjacent to the parcel across the street. This is the last use that was on the property, and you can kind of see some of the items that were stored there as part of that use. Just a street view of that. This is our Layton City general plan, and you can see on that map, there's a key on the side of the map that shows the different areas that are general plan for different uses. This particular area along Gentile was designated really on both sides of the street to transition over time to residential use. That includes the subject parcel tonight, along with parcels along the south side of Gentile that are currently being used for various nursery and commercial uses on the south side of the property. So again, all the properties in that general area are general plan to eventually convert or transition to residential uses. That time frame is not given in the general plan. This is a long-range plan. The general plan is that looks out 20 to 30 years and looking at what those uses will eventually be. It does not, the general plan does not change the zoning of the property. The zoning of the property is CP1. The applicant's allowed to use whatever uses are allowed in the CP1 zone or permitted uses. I want to just briefly, before I go to some of the other information here, I'm going to go to some of the zoning here in just a moment, but some of the historic zoning, but just really briefly, I want to go back to some information that we talked about during the work meeting, and that has to do with uses. And I want to mention one thing. Again, CP1 uses are permitted and allowed in this property. There are a number of uses that are allowed in the CP1 zone. You can see anything with a P or a C, or in the case of this table, which is a proposal that we'll look at next for some land use changes, there's also some Ls, L1, L2, L3, L4. Those are also uses that are allowed in that zone, subject to some special conditions. But as you go down that list of uses, you can see a number, and the CP1 uses are four columns over from that hard dark line there, kind of in the middle of the page. Uses on the left of that are residential. Uses on the right are zones on the left are residential. Zones on the right are your commercial and industrial zones. But looking again at the CP1, you can see a number of uses that can be established there, either permitted or conditional uses. So there's a lot of options for the property currently as it stands. A lot of those are more lighter commercial uses, but you can see things like gasoline, auto parts. As we go down through some of those other uses, light commercial flex manufacturing is a new use that we're proposing to be allowed on that property. Would be interior type, light industrial type uses. That's something that's allowed. As we get down to some of these commercial uses, you can see this whole litany of things that could be permitted. Some of these where you see the P cross through are uses that we've consolidated, but would be included in a list of permitted uses. Things like camera shops, and I think that one is book or stationery shop. Those are just being consolidated into a general retail category that would still be an allowed use on the property, just under a different category. You can see, again, going down the list of uses, a number of different commercial and retail and office options that are available today on the property that could certainly the property could certainly be used for those without any restriction other than the approval process for some of those. I want to mention there was a bit of discussion at the Planning Commission meeting about kind of the historic use of the property. As I mentioned, there was a conditional use permit that was approved in 2010 for the property. And I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint really briefly and then come back to this table to conclude my comments on the property. But again, as we look back historically, 1965, the property was not within the city. This is the post-annexation designation for the property. It was C2. C2 really had uses that were very similar to what would be allowed under a CP1 zone. They had a little bit of a wholesale distribution, but it was only for allowed retail uses in that zone. So we did find that code. We found that the uses were generally pretty similar to what would be allowed in a CP1. This is again that C2 zone. This is a circa 1978 map for zoning. 1985, we've got the CP1 zone established. So again, that's over. You're looking at over 30 years of zoning there for that CP1. And this is 1997, same zone district there. So it's been CP1 for quite some time with similar uses to what are permitted today. It's more of a neighborhood commercial zone. I'm going to go back to that briefly to that land use table again. the real issue here is it's not so much about what's been on the property. There is a history to every property in the city, and there's uses that have come and go on properties over the years. But the issue is that the request is to change the zone to M2, which is our heavy industrial zone in the city. So what we need to consider is what uses are allowed on that zone, before that zone, and what could potentially be on the property. Once you change the zoning for the property, then those uses that are permitted and conditional can be established on that property. So I'm going to go back up, and I think it's really good as we look at these uses to consider the various uses that would be allowed under an M2. So as you look at that, you can see I'm going to start just a little bit above this with the auto-related uses, but some of the uses that are allowed that would not be allowed in the CP1, large auto dealerships, gasoline, petroleum product storage, wrecking or salvage yard for auto parts is a conditional use in that M2 zone. Animal fowl slaughter, that's a permitted use in the M2 zone. Chemical and plastic manufacturing, permitted use. Contractor storage yard, permitted use. This one's probably not likely, but extraction of soil, sand, minerals, those are the types of uses. So this is certainly a heavy industrial zone that allows for pretty impactful uses. Junkyards are a conditional use in that zone. And remember, conditional use means allowed. That doesn't mean that it means that it's an allowed use in that zone. It can, once that zoning's in place, that's something that the property owner can come in and request, and as long as they meet the conditions of approval, would be approved. Heavy equipment, rental, those uses are all allowed uses. And you can go down that list in our industrial side of the uses. Recycle salvage yard, these are things that would be required to be approved by the Planning Commission, really, once this zone's established. So in our analysis of the zoning and of the general plan, based on the general plan designation for this property, it is general planned to eventually transition to residential. It certainly could remain CP1. We find that the CP1 uses allow a variety of commercial uses that would allow for viable commercial use of the property. As I mentioned, we're also proposing to add uses to the CP1 zone tonight that would give even more options to a person that wanted to look at establishing a use at that property. However, our recommendation is that this property is not an appropriate location for an M2 zone, for a heavy industrial zone, particularly because previous decisions that have been made by this and previous councils have established residential use very close to this property. And that residential use, by the nature of the types of uses that are allowed in the M2 zone, we just don't feel is compatible with an M2 zone change for this property. So that is staff's recommendation. This did receive review by the Planning Commission, and they did unanimously recommend that the City Council deny this request for a zone change to M2. I do want to mention there were several, I'm not sure how many of those adjoining residents are here tonight. There were several folks that are moving into that Mary's Meadows subdivision. I say several, I think there were 2 to 3 that spoke at that Planning Commission meeting that were concerned about the establishment of a M2 zone in this area. Some of them may be here tonight, I'm not sure. But again, our recommendation would be that this request for a zone change be denied, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can. I do want to mention that the applicant has a presentation, and you may wish to have them present that before you open the public hearing. And once I'm done and you finish with your questions for me, I'll get that presentation up and running.
Okay, very good. So council, do you have questions for Chad?
I just have one. So it's currently zoned to CP1, and we're going to be looking at changing our land use table potentially tonight as well. And this probably goes for any business that's currently a CP1. Will they be held to the old land use table, or will the new land use table be effective for?
Yeah, the new land use table would be the effective one, so they'd be able to apply for any of those new uses that we've added. Yep. If you decide to change the land use table, that's your next item, but yeah, certainly.
Chad, we talked a little bit about this in the work meeting. We're adding uses to CP1 tonight. It seems like the issue here once again is outdoor storage.
I would actually, well, I'll let you finish, then I'll
Just
respond.
let me. So My question is, and I guess we get to watch the presentation, but my question is, why not allow outdoor storage? We're already adding things. Why not allow outdoor storage and have it be conditional? And then it's case by case, and it's not heavy M2 where all the other permitted uses, those wouldn't exist because it would stay CP1. So just a thought. We have options, I would imagine. That's why we have these meetings, to talk about this.
I think what I would answer on that is I don't think it is about outdoor storage. Outdoor storage is one of the uses that's allowed in that M2 zone. There's a whole list of uses, though. The uses that started this conversation were not outdoor storage uses. Outdoor storage is a distinct use in our code. It's not a default. If you have a vacant piece of property, that's not outdoor storage. That's just a vacant or undeveloped piece of land that may have some things stored on it, but it's not outdoor storage. Outdoor storage has a specific definition. In that definition in our code, and I can bring that up really quick, but it includes things like storage of junk, trash. It's a very specific use that requires a specific set of standards to apply to it in order for that use to be allowed. So let me maybe answer that a different way. Outdoor storage that's accessory to a use that's allowed, a nursery is a perfect example. A nursery obviously is going to have trees and things stored outside of the building. A nursery would be allowed as a CP1 in a CP1 zone. In fact, there are some properties that are to the south of this that have that CP1 zone that have a nursery use established. But the idea there is that those trees are not, it's not outdoor storage. The use outdoor storage is its own use. What those are is they're part of that nursery use, and we've determined that, you know, the storage of trees outside and plant materials and bushes and things is different than the impacts that, say, a junkyard or a place where someone was storing pallets, which would be another thing that potentially an outdoor storage use could do. So again, it's outdoor storage is a specific use type. It's not just a default. It's not just, you know, I happen to have something outside, that's outdoor storage. No, it's, you would have to establish that right now through a conditional use permit process. Right. And so I don't think that is the only question. I think what the use was that started this conversation originally with staff was an RV storage and sales and rental use that wanted to establish on this property, but it's not allowed for the zoning. And so that use, that RV use, is not outdoor storage. It's its own use. So again, that's where I say I don't think that outdoor storage is the issue. I think it's more these other uses, the use types, the type of storage that goes along with them. Contractor yards would potentially have large equipment, backhoes, track hose, things like that stored on their site that are part of that use, but that we feel are not appropriate based on the development that's occurred around this site. We've had, again, decisions made based on current zoning or even zone change proposals that have now put residential very close to this site or across the street. And again, that's why we feel that all the uses that are allowed in M2 zone are not appropriate there. So, and I don't know that we would be comfortable as staff in recommending to you that we include outdoor storage as a use in our CP1 zone. It just opens up too many places for uses that we don't think are, that CP1 zone is more of a neighborhood commercial zone. So,
and I appreciate that, Chad. I look at it as well that it, just because that building's been, just because residential has come around, it doesn't, the building was there first. And so almost like you're a victim of being in business too long, sort of, you can look at it that way. And so I hopefully we'll have more of this discussion and listen to the presentation and the residents that.
Yeah, and I guess my response would be that they've had their CP1 zoning for a long time on that property. There's a whole variety of commercial uses. So there's a lot of things that can be done with that property that are allowed, permitted, conditional uses that are commercially viable, that can be commercially viable. We're adding a few more tonight that would give even additional commercial viability for the property. And you know, that to me is, you know, that's not necessarily, that's acknowledging the adjacent uses and making sure that we're compatible with those uses.
All right, well, I guess we wouldn't be having this meeting if they wanted to do something that was already permitted. So that's why we're here. So thank you, Chad.
Like I said earlier, I've had a few discussions with Alex, the applicant, and the outdoor storage part of it has been an integral part of his reasoning to go to the M2 in the discussions I've had with him, because the M2 is the only thing that allows that outdoor storage. Now, your definition of outdoor storage here helps a little bit, but I still think I agree with Clint. I mean, you've got an existing building, and just to say that you can't use that back for storage of anything seems unreasonable to me, and there's got to be some kind of middle ground. Were there any other options that you discussed with the applicant?
And Tim was mostly involved in those discussions, so I'm not sure exactly. I know that there was some discussion about, some of those CP1 type uses. Again, a nursery use is something that's allowed, that would have some accessory outdoor storage that we would anticipate with that type of a use. So I would say some of the uses, I haven't gone through that entire list, but I would say some of those uses probably would have that component as part of just the use of that building. I think when we talk about outdoor storage, again, you have different types of outdoor storage depending on the use, and outdoor storage as a use is different than the types of uses that would be allowed under M2. So let's say, as a hypothetical situation that you said, we want to allow outdoor storage as CP1. Well, that doesn't include all those other things like contractor yards and junk, those kind of things. So if someone came in for an RV sales and storage use, for example, that still wouldn't be allowed. It's that list of uses that outdoor storage, again, is its own use. It's not a default for, things that are outside of the building. It's, if you say outdoor storage, that's its own use. That's, that we'd be very uncomfortable with that particular use in that area because it allows so much different types of storage outside.
So Chad, can you speak to the point that this particular property has a privacy fence around it? I mean, wasn't that the purpose of perhaps some of that storage, the fact that you put up a privacy so that it did not show as a nuisance?
I know there was a screening fence installed at some point on the property. I think there's some slats and things there. I think the idea of appropriateness of outdoor storage there was addressed in that 2010 conditional use permit when they said that outdoor storage was not appropriate on the property. They had some provision for temporary storage of vehicles that were being repaired, and they had actually a cap on the number of those that could be there at any given time. But I think that was when the city made their determination about outdoor storage, even accessory outdoor storage, not being appropriate on the property. And that was with that screen fence, so I think that was already kind of looked at and addressed.
There's a vinyl fence now as well. So there's
two. There's a chain link with slats and a vinyl fence as well.
Yeah.
Plus the other thing is the homes have come in, but in essence, it's buffered on three sides by that road. I mean, a lot of the uses we always talk about in here, we talk about buffering. In essence, there's a road all the way around except for the west. I got a question for Gary. At the Planning Commission, we talked to Mason just a minute or two, and he mentioned the possibility of variances or non-conforming use applications. Is that a possibility on something like this, or I don't really understand them that well?
Hey, so variances and non-conforming use, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, in order to be able to utilize that back storage area.
Okay, so in the state of Utah, use variances are prohibited. So in other words, you can't do that.
Okay.
Because essentially that's changing the zoning without going through this process, is what use variance would be. Non-conforming uses, yes, non-conforming uses are essentially a use that was legal at one time and was made illegal by a subsequent requirement. So what the applicant would have to do is they would have to show what the extent of the use, because a non-conforming use is not allowed to grow bigger than what it has been in the past. It cannot grow bigger. And so he'd have to show that this use has, a good example was the beehives. Before you actually regulated beehives, there were, I think you were allowed to have beehives and nobody ever thought of limiting them. The date that you limited them is like a snapshot in time, and whatever a person had prior to the date of the zoning ordinance came into being that prohibited it is what they're allowed to continue to have. And so a non-conforming use is an option, but just looking at the photographs of what this property has had on it in the past, I don't think a non-conforming use is really going to do anything for, for the uses that are desired.
You'd only be allowed to have what you had there in the past.
That's it. Mm-hmm. Just the personal, looks like a lot of personal items were stored there, and maybe one or two vehicles. But if you were to establish that as the non-conforming use, essentially you couldn't ever have anything more than that. And that's not going to accomplish what he wants to have accomplished.
I'll let Gary chime in here too, but if I could just add to that, the issue, so non-conforming use determinations are something that go through the director for review and approval. And the issue in this case is that there was an approval in 2010 that established a use. That was established for the last 10 years. It's a conditional use permit. So that's where we start from, what was permitted on the property. It's not a matter of, that had specific conditions. If someone was non-compliant with those conditions, that's not non-conforming, that's non-compliant. It has to have been legally allowed previously and then changed by some subsequent zoning change. So in this case, you have an approval for the property that prohibited outdoor storage expressly. And so that's the standard we'd be looking at is do they have some type of use that, historically that was allowed at one time. In this case, it was prohibited. So that's where the non-conforming determination, it would be impossible for us to make a determination that outdoor storage was an allowed use when it was expressly prohibited by a condition of approval.
So this is a good teaching opportunity because what Chad is saying is exactly right, and that is if you have a non-conforming use, you have it as long as you continually maintain it. Then at some point in time, if you come in for a new application for a permitted use or a conditional use, you lose your non-conforming status. So what Chad is saying is that 10 years ago, somebody came in for a conditional use on this property. And that conditional use ended any right to a non-conforming status for anything that they had prior to that, and then the conditional use actually takes over. So the conditions of that conditional use would still be in place today unless it was revoked or unless it disappeared. It may not be conforming to those conditions, but it's a new status, a new zoning status, and it would be in place today. That's what he'd have to look at.
And that conditional use stays with the property, not the business, right?
It does, yes. That's
Okay.
correct.
So
It
I
does.
didn't understand those, that's why I asked you.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great questions, good questions.
So we all got a letter from Mr. Hines. And this is kind of where I'm at on it. I think you too, Clint, there is, the M zone was requested because he has no other option really to use that outdoor storage. So I guess you could do an M zone with a development agreement to restrict it, according to our training tonight. But I don't know the answer here. I mean, I know he's got a piece of property that I hate to see him not be able to use as it's been traditionally used, and I understand that it's been non-compliant in some ways, but he's trying to become compliant. So his only other option to use that outdoor storage is I understand from him, he's been told is the M zones. So that's kind of.
The difficulty is in an M zone, there are no conditions on outdoor storage. In other words, it's a permitted use in an M zone, so an intense outdoor storage use would probably not be appropriate for that particular area. But and what I think Chad is saying is outdoor storage in and of itself. In other words, if that lot were just to be an outdoor storage lot, that probably would not be appropriate for this because
No,
you
and
just
I wouldn't
stuff
want it to be.
But storage related to one of these uses, such as the nursery or some of the other uses that are listed up there, that would be appropriate. You could actually put things, in there if you wanted to sell trees or something of that nature. Those things could be sold. The other thing is it doesn't prohibit the addition of an additional building back there. For you remember I remember just south of Antelope Drive, that long building that is right across the street from, there's a long building. You come down Fort Lane, and there's a building that is right across the street from a residential area that you approved some time ago. Do you remember that one? And what you ended up in doing is that, I don't know what the zoning on that was, but I think it was commercial. And what ended up in happening there was you were able to provide for berming, you were able to provide for traffic control, you were able to provide for all of those things because it came in as a new use. All of those uses, those types of uses would be permitted on this property. It's just that the use that he's wanting to put on there right now, Chad is indicating is not allowed, and he's right. It's not allowed under it.
So what I'm understanding though is if, for instance, the RV repair place if it was allowed in the CP, he could store the RVs he's working on or he's done with back there.
So is that,
as part of the
is that a
building.
conditional use?
I don't know that that was in the CP zone. I'm just using that as an example.
That's the issue, is that that particular use is not allowed in the CP1 zone, yeah. And
But
you
if
make
it was, because
Yeah.
he's got the conditional use that allowed for auto repair, minor auto repair, with the storage of, I believe, 10 vehicles out there.
I think that was the right, I could pull up those conditions, I believe that's right, yeah.
So that, you're right, you're correct on that. Whatever is in the CP1 right now, he'd be able to do, and if there was storage related to that, it would not be a separate use like in the manufacturing zone, but it would be related to the use that is in place there. Like I seem to remember, I think there was some Arctic.
Yeah, well, that's what I was driving at, is that we had the Arctic Cat dealership in there.
repairs,
And repairs, but yet he had, I guess, inventory that was stored in the back for his sales. And you're saying that's what made him non-compliant though, right? Because he
That
wasn't
was-
supposed
there
to
was some
store it.
non-compliance
Yeah,
there,
you'd need to comply, but whatever, like if he was repairing, if that was allowed, for example, repairs were allowed, then you could, the items that you were repairing, you could store in the parking lot or,
But not new.
but not new. Yeah, new sales, I think that's not in the CP1, is it?
For,
For, new car sales?
no,
Or-
not those car sales or, truck and trailer sales, RV, I think it says travel trailers, what we call it in the code, but it's an RV, so those are not allowed in the CP1.
A little more intense.
But what you stated earlier, though, if he was to do an enclosure back there, then he could store it because it would be an enclosed storage versus an outdoor storage.
Yeah.
Well, only if the use is allowed, so that RV sales is not allowed, it's not an allowed use in the zone. So, but for an allowed use, yeah, you could have indoor.
Yeah, for whatever you're allowed to use in a CP zone, if you built another building and put those inside, put everything inside, that'd be great. There's a lot of uses that would be available if you were to construct a new building or even use the building that's there for that purpose, but. Any other questions?
But Gary, you still wouldn't be able to build a building as a storage unit.
Right.
Because storage units are not allowed in that zone.
They're not allowed in a CP1 that I'm aware.
Nope.
Just looking through the list. Yeah, storage, indoor or outdoor, is not allowed in the CP1, but inventory for certain commercial
For his
uses
commercial.
or for even the types of uses that Chad was talking about tonight that they've added, where you add, something where you're making things. I don't even know what the
Yeah, there's light manufacturing.
Light manufacturing type
that'll be,
uses.
Potentially added if you choose to tonight, but,
So you-
other type of fulfillment type uses, those are anticipated to be indoor. But certainly you could build a new structure back there and have, light manufacturing or, retail fulfillment, e-commerce.
Again, back to, we're adding things to the zones to this evening as part of this land use table, and because people want to do business. And they've come to us and say, hey, we want this light manufacturing, the salad dressing people, and we're accommodating them by adding things, and here we have someone who's been here for a very, very long time, and it seems like we're not accommodating them in a similar way. That's one of the concerns that I have, is that we can change that. We can give options. We should be able to have that discussion and have an option for them. I think that's appropriate.
And while it's appropriate, you got to remember that I just caution you this way, and that is that what you do for one, you must do for all. So if you were to make an exception for this business and put it into your code, that means that anybody who has this type of situation, who is abutting a commercial or a residential area, you'd have to consider and just make sure that that's what you want in those areas of the city where, and we do have quite a few, where where residential has started to encroach into commercial. And that one I was talking about on Fort Lane is one of them. It was one of them where they encroached, so.
And just to that point, CP1 zoning, where it exists other places in the city, is predominantly close to residential. It's a neighborhood commercial zone. So you'd have, if you change it for this property, it'd be changed for all those properties in any of those situations, and they could have the same types of uses. So,
And we talked this evening about the development agreements. Could that be a condition of this, that it's just for this one?
So development agreement, you could not, you remember at the beginning,
You'd
we
have to-
talked about,
You'd
you
have to
can't,
change the zone and-
Right.
and restrict it like Tom just talked
Okay.
about doing.
yeah, you'd have to put a significant restriction on it.
Yeah, so for instance, you could, I'm not saying we have to or should, but you could do an M zone and then restrict it down to a certain amount of, eliminate a lot of the uses and just say you can use it for an RV repair or limit the noise, the dust, anything that may be detrimental as a possibility or not.
That's a possibility.
Or could it be a conditional use in CP1, and then it would come to the planning commission to each individual instance?
It would be a conditional use that would exceed what you allow now as a conditional use in the CP1 zone. So you'd either have to find a
Well,
new zone or put that new use in the CP1 zone.
Yeah, that's what
as-
I'm, like what we're doing tonight with,
as
what we're
outside
talking about
storage.
doing tonight. Or RV repair.
For RV repair and storage, you'd have to put in a
Right.
CP1 zone.
It's just-
And you can't turn down a conditional use, so you gotta remember that. So you gotta understand, even though you may think it's appropriate here because of the history of this,
Mhm.
you know, you may feel that. There's another area of the city where you got a commercial CP1 use where somebody would love to store RVs, where it may not fit because surrounded by residential, those two things don't usually get along. So maybe in this one case, because of the history, you're saying let's make an exception, but you really can't look at it that way. You've either got to change the zoning and reduce the intensity of it or
These lists are very long
Mhm.
of these uses.
And they're confusing.
They're on there because there was an issue, and so, okay, that's why they're long. I don't think someone just sat down and said, okay, let's see, what should we permit, what should we not? It was because we've been in business for a very long time, been in a city for 100 years, and it just keeps growing, and here's another, I would think, something for us to, once again, the list's long. Is this something that should be considered to accommodate and figure it out? Because it's easy to say, doesn't fit, wrong zone, against the general plan, residential all around it, and that's, yet we have someone who has a piece of property that's been doing business and wants to do this and is going through the proper channels, and here we are talking about it, so.
So step back, eliminate the applicant, and make a decision based for the city. That's what you got to do. Because if you make it on behalf of one applicant over another, I understand what you're saying, and you want to,
Well,
but you got to step back and you got to make it on behalf of the entire city. And
I
just-
guess I would be, if we step back from the applicant, I'm thinking about our business community. I mean, they're residents too.
And that's the right
that's-
perspective, is to look at the residents and the businesses and say, does this fit? You're exactly right, Clint.
So Chad, here on the proposed amendments, it says, retail sales and commercial services will now become a permitted use. Are they specifically defined?
Retail sales and commercial uses, yeah, it's those uses that we're consolidating. It's things that are, typical retail sales. You'd have clothing sales, you'd have anything that would be allowed as a retail sales item. It doesn't include those items that are specifically, it's not a catch-all for any sales on the property. So things like truck and trailer sales, those kind of things are still specifically called out in a different section of code, but. things that
Commercial
are-
services as well?
What's that?
Commercial services, it says?
Yeah, you've got things like commercial services include office uses, include those various like neighborhood type service uses, things like hairdressers, those types of specific uses where you're providing a service.
So at one point in time, there was a grocery store, I believe, on this site. Are you saying that's,
I think groceries allowed in the CP1. I'd have to pull that table up, but I'm
It
pretty sure
was.
that.
Yeah.
pretty sure
It's
there.
permitted.
Yep. There's a
Gas
number of
station.
uses that are allowed
Yeah.
there, and the idea is that this is a neighborhood serving commercial zone, and I think, we definitely want to support business, but we also have to take that broader view of what are the impacts to surrounding properties? Is this the place for that type of use, or are there other places in the city where you could establish that use? And I know we definitely have lots of property in the city where that RV storage, RV sales would be allowed. So just the question is it right for this one?
Chad, I'm going to ask you to go to the map, and will you go up
Which one, which map? This one? or-
the geo map that we have for the city that shows the overlays of everything?
Oh, I'll have to pull that up 1 second.
Sorry, because I'm going to ask for a comparison on something. It's up on Fairfield Drive, before you get to Highway 193 on the west side of the street. And it is the only current RV sales I can think of in repair in the city.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm curious, yeah, Tips RVs. I'm curious
Yeah.
what the zoning is on that.
Just 1 moment.
And I think the RV is just one possibility that he had. I mean, I don't think that's what he's set in stone on. It's just one of the people who've looked at it.
Well, it goes back to like Gary was saying, whatever the zoning is what the future possibility is. So that's the thing we need to kind of
Unless you go with a development agreement to restrict that down.
correct.
All right, you'll have to walk me where you're at there. I'm not exactly
Okay,
sure
so
where
it's
that one's
on,
at.
Fairfield.
it's on Fairfield north of Antelope, but south of 193 on the west side of the street. It's adjacent to, I think, what used to be Roche Disposal.
So you got Fairfield, no, scroll down.
We got Antelope there.
There's your
Keep
Fairfield.
going north.
So go north a little bit.
I'm going to turn on the aerial photo. That'll probably help me find it.
You're on Fort Lane there. It's on
Portland,
Fairfield.
thank you. Get my bearings here.
There you go.
This one, or I'm not.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Those are all industrial. I can tell just from the color, but we can click on it and see what the specifics say. That's M1.
Okay, so it's in the appropriate zone,
Oops.
so. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, those are all industrial zones.
Since you've got that up, pull up Stotts Welding. Go down to Gentile.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Since you've got this up, let's go ahead and verify Stotts Welding as well. Well, gosh, I'm dating myself. That's what used to be in the
It's,
facility. So it,
That's from the convenience store on Sugar Street, but on
Yeah.
the south side of Gentile. Well, you're looking for that. You have two CP1s in J&J and Mountain States plants, and it says here that nursery is a conditional use. Do they both have conditional use permits?
I don't know the history on those. Maybe Gary does, or someone that's been here for a while. I don't know if they've got a conditional use permit. A lot of their use is in the county. I'm not sure if they have an active conditional use permit for those portions in the city or not. Do you know, Gary? So Sugar
what's
Street,
that little red triangle?
The red
right there?
triangle.
this? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
right
it's
there.
one of our commercial zones. I'd have to see what that one is. That one is CP3.
3?
Mm-hmm. Might be appropriate to have the applicant give their presentation and have the public comment
Good idea.
before we have more conversation.
Tough one. Good.
I'm going to say a couple words and then we'll do our presentation, and then I'd probably like to say a couple other things. Lots been said tonight. It's kind of a lot to unpack. It was mentioned that the businesses that are part of the uses can keep their inventory outside. And we've had many, many businesses inquire. Every one of them has been told, no, nothing outside can be kept. The other thing is, is it is about outdoor storage. You know, we've had all these businesses inquire, but, you know, there's like a metal siding business. They want to keep their inventory out there. You know, we had a developer. He wanted to be able to park equipment out there. We had the RV business. You know, and they were told, you know, they can't keep anything out there. So yeah, it is about the storage. And you know, as far as it being equal, yeah, J&J's a nursery, but it's not just plants. I mean, it's everything out there. That's it for the moment. Maybe we ought to do our presentation, and then I have a couple other things to add.
As it's been kind of pretty good out, Alex and his family doing good. Some of the interesting things that I talked about the development of properties and property.
Yeah, you need to get, you need to be right on that mic.
Like this?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Do you want me to start over?
Probably, yeah.
So, with that being said, we can see the CP1 zones are on the Heinz property, as well as Mountain States and J&J Nursery down the road. And it's important to see how much residential is kind of coming around and the change in time, and that's what's been developed through here. That used to be agricultural, it used to be other uses going on as the Heinz family has stayed busy working and trying to make a living. But another thing that's interesting about the precedence that's been set is that the big concern about M2 zoning next to residential is the big discussion and argument about what could possibly go on with this property with Heinz. But what we have is a precedence of quite a significant amount of residential directly abutted to M2 zoning in Layton City. We've measured over 6,800 linear feet of residential directly abutted. However, when we look at the planning that's gone on around the Heinz property here, none of the residential is directly abutted to this property. It is buffered by over 50 feet of road. So the residential really is not abutting any of this property. So whatever zone it is, it's not an abutted property. It's actually a buffered property and a buffered zone provided by that road.
But the other thing is there's no outdoor storage and there's no warehousing allowed in CP1. You know, so I'm really painted into a corner here.
So this just shows the property across the street, which is Mountain States, and it's showing their outdoor storage and how it's organized or not organized, and what's going on adjacent to residential zones. Although it's not M2 zone, as we saw before in this previous slide. Right here, they're actually carrying out the same outdoor storage uses that are going on in the M2 zone. We can see the same example at the J&J nursery property down the road. Their outdoor storage is carried on similarly in the same way. In addition, we can see that outdoor storage has always been a part of this property. One of the topics that's been brought up is that a private fence was required of Mr. Hines to enclose the outdoor storage at some point as at a request by Layton City. Mr. Hines complied with that and was cooperative, put in a fence, and then later on was requested to put in privacy slats for that fence. So evidence that outdoor storage was there and was known exists even further because the city requested that the outdoor storage be enclosed. Here's some historical record of some outdoor storage. This trailer's been on the property for over 30 years, and it really hasn't moved. As we can see, their business license provides for warehousing and storage. And that's kind of where we're getting to, is that the M2 zone is the only zone that really has anything listed in it for the outdoor storage and the warehousing that is their business and has been their business.
You might scroll back one more time and show that license again. One more. Farm product, warehouse and storage, okay.
So here, if we look at the table of permitted uses, when we look here, it's really difficult for everybody to see this from here, but it's an M1 and an M2 listed here. These two zones are the only two zones that have any allowed storage uses. If you look through storage, none of them are permitted all through here. They're only listed in M1 and M2. So Mr. Hines can't carry on the business that he has had for many decades the way that the current CP1 zone is organized. But I think there's some interesting ideas of possibly going with an M2 zone with a development agreement for restrictions that would put everybody at ease. And I don't think Mr. Hines has any objectives of having an animal slaughtering facility or any of the things that everybody's been scared about that is going to go on. Alex Hines wants outdoor storage to be able to carry on as it's been going on. I think that's all I have.
Okay, very good. Okay, council, do you have, oh, excuse me, you wanted to make one more statement, right? And then as part of your presentation?
You know, just one of the, this big problem is the no outdoor storage. You know, and I know the concern is the residential around there. And you know, when I was a young kid, that building was in the middle of nowhere. You know, I'd go to work there and there was just nothing around. I mean, there's the candy store next door. And other than that, the candy store and grabbing a burger uptown was a long, long ways away. You know, it was just farm field after farm field for as far as you could see and as far as you could drive. You know, and then evolution came along, and you know, the developers came in, and you know, they laid asphalt down over all the you know, beautiful farm fields, and you know, people, they wanted to move to the country, and you know, they built their houses and, you know, filled their driveways full of cars and parked their, you know, just like what is happening, and they parked their RVs down the side of the house. What I found kind of interesting over the years growing up is, you know, everybody wants to move to the country, and then, you know, at least once or twice a year we have somebody that walks into the office and, you know, tells us how ugly our agricultural business is. You know, and just kind of interesting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hines. Okay, council, have you got any more questions before I turn it over to the public for now? Okay, I'd like to remind everyone this is a public hearing, so now is the time if you wish to speak on this one particular item. If you choose to, please step to either side of the mic and state your name and address.
Excuse me. Madam Mayor, council folks. My name is Randy and Karen Johnson. We will be living at 151 Weldon Way, which is lot 214 in the Mary Meadows development. When we looked at these lots about 14 months ago and talked to the developer, Brian Robbins, we're very familiar with Arctic Cat. They actually, on top of that trailer that you had mentioned, you used to store a lot of stuff that was very visible above all that area. So six-foot fences really didn't restrict the visibility. My industry, there's a whole big difference between light commercial and heavy manufacturing. Okay, I worked for Boeing. As a matter of fact, Boeing's right up the other side. Lot different environment, lot different noise. The 50-foot road you were talking about, that's a great buffer for certain things. Doesn't do a darn thing for noise, doesn't do a darn thing for pollution, doesn't do a darn thing for visibility. So we do like entrepreneurs. We understand you've had that business for quite a while. There are other applications that business could go into there that does not require making this into heavy industrial. Whether or not the intention is to go ahead and immediately use that under some of those guidelines of what heavy industrial will allow compared to commercial, time changes, as you have experienced over the course of your business, having that for a bunch of years. We do like the country, have no problem with agriculture equipment. At the same time, we are building a home that we would like to have void of all the extra noise that was not present when we originally signed on to that lot. And I believe that'll be the case for most of the residents in there. There are locations for heavy industrial. There are locations for light commercial. This is a location for light commercial, market, or what was there. Candidly, we talked to our developer. We're concerned about Arctic Cat just because of seeing what you were referring to as non-compliance. Items stored up above, totally visible. And our developer assured us that that was always going to be maintained as commercial. Obviously, he cannot do that because that decision is upon the city and upon the folks like yourselves. But a lot of people made decisions based on the understanding that that business would be maintained as light commercial as it has been for decades. And when we saw the sign for the public notice, public hearing that we're attending today, that was a big surprise. Because I can speak for ourselves, we wouldn't have bought the lot. I wouldn't be putting $1 million house on there right now if I'd have known that was the case. That is a pure fact. There's a lot of other places we could have traveled to. Henry Walker just bought the rest of the development. I've spoken to people coming in. Half of them, when they ask, they'll walk up to us in our house, what's going on? And we explain, we don't know because we haven't attended this hearing yet. She said, I've got a gentleman that I've got his phone number. I'm supposed to call him at the end of this meeting to let him know. That'll be his decision process of whether he purchases a lot in there and builds. Again, not an issue at all with understanding that as a business that's existed. We all understand that as we walked in there and purchased our lots, built our homes, under the auspices of it being light commercial.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, anyone else?
Madam Mayor and members of the Town Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Doug Kosai. My wife Lorna is here with me. We will soon be neighbors of Mr. and Mrs. Johnson in the Mary Meadows development. We currently live in North Salt Lake. We've been residents of Davis County for the better part of 25 years. I have been. And with all due respect to Mr. Hines, and I sincerely appreciate his desire to stay in business. He's been here a lot longer than I have. Recognize that. Like Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Johnson, we bought and are buying the home that we'll be residing in based on the fact that that area was going to be residential and that that particular property would have little or no noise factor. I will admit that we were very uneducated about that particular property before we signed a contract to purchase that. So thank you for bringing this to our attention by putting those signs up in the neighborhood that there was a change being considered. It appears to me that if the real issue here is allowing outdoor storage on that particular piece of property, and that if we are currently zoning that property as light commercial CP1, and the only alternative under existing codes is for him to seek, for Mr. Hines to seek a change to M2, that's forcing him and all of you into sort of adopting a nuclear option on this piece of property, where a more surgical type of solution might be more appropriate. The concern I have, and I hope my wife shares me, we haven't had really time to discuss this amongst ourselves right here without interfering with the proceedings, but the concern I have is that by approving this request to change the zoning to M2, you're not opening it up to just allowing a little more outdoor storage on this property, but anything else that might come along in the future with regard to M2 allowances. Who's to say that with all the intent that Mr. Hines has right now of just, putting a few things outside and hiding them behind a fence and so forth, that some other kind of business might not come along and offer him an outrageous amount of money to purchase this property from him, an offer he couldn't possibly refuse, so that they could put in one of these slaughterhouses or whatever else nobody would possibly want to have in that location. And if it was zoned M2, they'd have no choice but to allow it. I don't think we want that to happen. So my recommendation would be to not approve this particular request, the nuclear option, but to have him come back and work with you all, the Planning Commission and so forth. And I'm a little ignorant on how these things work. I don't know the details of how you go about that. But come up with a more surgical approach that might serve everyone's needs and protect the interests of all of the future residents, myself and my wife included, and the Johnsons, and any others who may be here, and all the others that are going to be moving in, so that as this area becomes more residential, that everyone will be happy with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you do me a favor? Do you mind going over here, because we just wiped that side down? Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Jaron Durham, and just like the previous two comments, I purchased a lot in the Mary's Meadow development probably in the early part of August. I did call Layton City because, of course, that development is fairly close to M2 stuff, just east where Mr. Hines has some M2 property where he carries on a business there. And the person that I spoke with, I don't remember the name, but they took me to the future Layton future master plan where it talks about master communities and things like that. And rezoning this flies directly in the face of what that whole website, the intent of that whole website is. I understand Mr. Hines' issue, and if I own that property, I'd want to, get a return on my investment, and I believe he can. The issue here, he hasn't used that property as part of his M2 for at least 10 years. So to say that he's been painted into a corner doesn't make a lot of sense. I think there's plenty of ways that he can make a good return on his investment within the zoning that is part of that master plan. And if you look at that definition, planned neighborhood commercial, it enhances the residential experience. The small convenience stores or whatever, the intent there is to enhance residential. M2 heavy manufacturing, that would be a huge deterrent. I will not build my house. We're totally on hold until we know what's going on here, because I don't want, our lot's lot 207, and it's a stone's throw away from that property. And so, I'm a little bit like, I did call Layton City. I was taken to this nice website that, is really a work, you guys have put a lot of effort into that. And just like what I think Chad, or I can't remember your name, I apologize, but he said, all of the stuff that you've done has been a certain direction. And I don't think there's been any injustice done to the property owner here. It's pretty obvious that it's been zoned that way from 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever. And so I think the reasonable solution is to keep the zoning. I mean, even when you guys are talking about using, broadening the uses for CP1, I'll be honest, that kind of scares me as a homeowner. It's like, wait a minute, what does that mean? Because my idea of neighborhood commercial is to enhance the residential experience. And hopefully we're not going backwards. And if we set a precedent, I was in the planning meeting, and there was that thought where it's only 700 yards, or, it's really close to the M2 property, so why can't we just annex it? Man, there's lines for a purpose. You try to, you define your properties, and then you go forward. So I would plead with this council not to approve. It goes in the face of what you guys have tried to do. It goes in the face of how these developers have marketed this residential community, and I don't think that would be fair. And I think the owner can get a return on their investment within the CP1 designation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is David Isaacson. I'm at 306 East, 1500 North in Layton. I've been a resident of Layton Davis County since 2014, and I am also someone who's just purchased a lot in the Mary Meadows. I'm not going to waste anybody's time and say the same thing everybody else has already said. I kind of agree with everything they said, and I totally recognize that they were there before us, and they've been there a long time, and I don't want to disrespect the work that's been put into their organization, their business to make money. However, things do change. Obviously, the zoning commission has designated that as a residential plan. I fully support that plan. I fully support keeping it in a CP1. However, I'd like to see what the expectation is for increasing the requirement or increasing the capabilities of a CP1. I too was surprised to hear that, so I'd like to see more of what that means and what could potentially occur there. And I say, I'm with everybody else, let's look at the long term in 10, 20, 30 years. I still plan on living there, and I don't want to look at something that's going to be producing noxious fumes or just loud, noise pollution or any other kind of pollution, because we just don't know what it's going to look like in 10 or 20 years if that golden opportunity that comes up for them to sell that property to another organization that can do something much different within the entire realm of CP2 or even just any kind of M status. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to speak on the topic?
No, but I got a question for the applicant, Alex Hines.
Sure.
A question for you, Alex, is in my discussions with you, like I disclosed to these guys, I got the impression that your intent is not heavy manufacturing. You just felt like you were painted into a corner to go for a manufacturing zone in order to utilize that outdoor storage.
It's the only one that allows outdoor storage. Yeah, it's all about outdoor storage. I'd have no problem with a M2 zone that restricts, smells and noises and garbage and cattle or slaughterhouse and a bunch of it.
So my question is, what other alternatives were presented to you by the staff as you went through this whole process?
Yeah, they just said if I didn't like the uses on the table, just to sell it into houses. And that's part of the thing is that they say, oh, well, it's, everybody all the businesses that have come in and acquired, they say, yeah, the city's telling us that is future residential. And that's a 6,000 square foot building, and I don't know, it's like 30-foot tall ceilings. There's probably another 6,000 square feet of cement out there. I mean, you gotta be crazy to tear that building down. So yeah, I mean, what I picture is basically the same thing that's allowed at J&J, that's allowed at Mountain States across the street. I mean, you look at those places, they're storing their inventory. That's just their inventory. I mean, that's what every business wants. They want to have some warehouse, and they want to have a place to store inventory. And that's what we've always used it for. I mean, yeah, it's what it is. That's the existing building, existing business.
Okay. Thank you. Any other
Okay,
questions?
thank you, Alex.
Okay, council, do you have any other questions?
I have a comment. Go ahead, Clint. If you
I
have-
my comment tonight. So I thank everybody for coming and for lending your voice to this tonight. Where I am now, the issue I have is there isn't an option. There isn't something on the table to say, okay, here's the offer that I have, and here's what I can do with that property. He's had multiple people come and talk and chat with him and offer things, but there's nothing concrete to make a decision on. To be able to say, well, okay, this is the business, and what can you do? Well, we don't have that. We don't have that tonight. It's just zone change. And to me, that's looking at the zone M2 going heavy without a there's not a business. There's not a tenant to compromise or to talk about or to. It's just we've had these people inquire. So without I'm saying without here's what we want to do, here's the plan. You mentioned siding, you mentioned RV, you mentioned one other. That's where I am. If there's something more concrete.
I mean, yeah, basically, I'm the tenant, and, you know, I've mentioned a lot of other potential tenants, and, you know, that's what I want. That's what everybody wants, is they want some outdoor storage. You know, there's been nobody that wants a slaughterhouse. There's been nobody that's wanted a junkyard. I mean, I get that if there isn't a restriction with the M2, that, you know, that could be done. But the problem is every business, I mean, you know, they don't have the time and the money to come and fight and spend month after month after month and spend time on doing this. You know, I just really need a set zone, a set group of uses that work for the existing building, that for what I've described for myself as a tenant and possible future tenants.
Okay.
So, my comment kind of goes along with yours, Alex, not Alex, Clint. I'm certainly not in favor of an M2, a wide open M2, but I also understand some of the uses, like on the table, he can't even warehouse, and it is a warehouse. So my suggestion would be to table this tonight, have Alex and the staff get together and somehow come to a development agreement that restricts the things that he doesn't want, maybe compromise with a few things that he does want, and come up with some kind of agreement there. So like you say, Clint, we have something to judge by, not just a wide open, he can do anything. As the gentleman suggested here, more of a surgical approach where, you know, some of the things that he wants probably they're not opposed to. But just rezoning it at M2 opens the door wide open. So my suggestion would be for them to get together and kind of come up with some kind of restrictions. And if it's a M1 zone with the development agreement, not an M2, I don't think it has to go to the M2. M1, if you look through the chart, doesn't have a lot of differences, but there are some, is lighter manufacturing, and come up with that development agreement and then decide.
And I think that'd be good for the residents too. I mean, you know, some of those uses, I don't think, in CP1, I don't think they want to cross. I mean, I don't think anybody wants a gas station across the street, you know, or, you know, just a giant parking lot for some sort of other thing, you know. I think probably with it being fenced and, you know, a little more out of vision and probably just a little less noticeable is probably what they want. And that's kind of what I want. I think that's what works for me as a tenant, and that's what I find most people are looking for.
Okay. All right.
Well,
Thank you, Mr.
I mean, it's not the first
Hines.
development agreement we've done, so.
I've been sitting here playing tennis, and I've come to the conclusion M2, I agree, it's not, I don't think that's gonna work. I trust everything that you said to be true, but, you know, you're not gonna live forever. You're gonna be like me and get old one day and wanna do something else. And so there's a lot of options that are open. And I understand building a home there, you don't want to start something and then find out the world kind of falls apart in that direction. I like the idea of everyone really to go back, and I'm not a proponent of waiting on things. I don't like it personally. But I think this time, I'm kind of caught off guard too. And I think they need to look, and maybe there's an option, for something that's, and I realize, the minute you open the door, you got to be careful what you're allowing in, because it doesn't just apply here. It applies everywhere. So whatever we do decide on, we have to realize that that's exactly what's going to happen. But I do believe that maybe they can go back and look at something and maybe find something that, I think there's a lot of things out there besides, if you want outdoor storage, then maybe we put, I don't know the term, but restrictions on it, that type of thing, so we're not looking at 40 feet of onion crates, and I don't mean to use that, but you know what I mean. So it's not sky high, and things like that. But, I think you got an opportunity to make it viable for you, and also, fit where you're at, if you go back and, I don't know how we do that. I'm a rookie at this stuff, and, but I feel we need to have some input in a circle that try to get some information.
Okay.
That,
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And one more last comment, if you could.
But I think it should be understood by the residents and everybody here that that development agreement stays with the property. If the
Right,
if
yeah,
another
right.
business comes in after, they're still held to the same
Right.
conditions.
Well, I really hope that, you guys are suggesting we put something together
Right.
and not just wiping it away. I mean, that's what I've been trying
Yeah.
to put together with the planners, and they
Okay.
weren't open to it. I'm just asking for the same thing that J&J has and that Mountain States Nursery has. And you look at what they're doing with their CP1, and that's all I want to do is be able to use the outside ground.
Right. And it's my belief, if you find a business that you can use, I don't know what the term outdoor storage means, but, right? If I have a business that fits in CP1, I can store things there that are used for whatever I'm doing.
No, they've been told no. Everybody's been told no.
Well,
outdoor
I think,
storage.
I think sometimes it's how it's presented. If you come in, I understand, believe me, I hear this fairly
I've been
regular.
battling it,
And then when you
I
find
get
out,
shut down on a regular
Yeah.
basis,
and that's why
I'm here.
that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Okay? And there's certain things we can do, certain things we can't do, certain things we don't want to do. And that's why we sit here and sometimes make decisions after those decisions can't be made elsewhere. So I'm with you, Tom.
Well, I think, personally, I think an M1 zone with a development agreement is more reasonable because, for instance, it's a warehouse, and warehousing isn't even allowed in the CP1. Whereas you could restrict that warehousing so it's not detrimental to the neighborhood or anybody. So I think in my opinion, that's the way to go. But that would be up to them and the staff to get together and get that agreement drawn up so we could look at it and say yay or nay. And the citizens could come and say yay or nay.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here because I think there's been enough discussion that's gone back and forth, and quite honestly, I get the impression that you guys are not willing to make an exact decision on this topic tonight, which is fine. However, we do have several citizens out here that are going to be making a large purchase,
Sure.
and we need to be cognizant of that. I think I'm willing to take a motion here as far as your action with a date certain so it doesn't leave this thing dragging on. And with whatever requirements you want to ask of the staff, I'd entertain that as well.
Can I ask for some clarification from our attorney?
Sure.
So, Gary, can we do that? Or are we just wasting our time sending it back?
We're just tabling it temporarily.
Well, we're going to table it, but if we're going to table and you're going to ask for an M1 with a development agreement, is that something that the planning commission can even consider? And if the answer is no, then a decision needs to be made tonight. If it is something that they can, based on our recommendation, to take a look at and make a decision, then I'm all for sending it back. But I'm not willing to waste a couple of weeks if we send it back and that's not a legal thing to do.
What'd you say?
The
So
answer
Gary,
to
would
that
they
was
have,
yes.
would there have to be another application for the M1, or could that just be a revision to this one? Okay.
And we have this business in front of us. I think we can make a motion on the business in front of us. Either way, if Mr. Heinz might get a call tomorrow when someone wants to do the CP1 and this is the business before us tonight. I think we ought to do that. And then let's see what happens. I really want to see, once again, I'm kind of like with what's that going to be? And there might be a CP1 business that's permitted and that unfortunately the residents might not like either. And that's a different meeting and it's a different process. But I think the business tonight, I think we've had a great conversation. I think we can vote on that and then see what happens. That's would be my.
And certainly what I've proposed here is I think enough discussion has gone on. I feel like we've gotten, we certainly have heard from both sides, but I think we do have other business. Not that I'm trying to hurry this up. I think I want everybody to know I really believe in a full discussion and have allowed the discussion to go on. And I think we're now at a point, because I'm hearing the repeats, that we do need to take action.
Okay, I'll make the motion that we table this for tonight for 2 meetings from now. Well, if it has to go to the planning commission, that might not work. So I would say, what kind of timetable would you look at it to get it to the planning commission? Could you get it to them in not next week, but the next week's meeting? Get together with Alex and kind of come up with something, or is that too soon?
Well, maybe just really briefly, I want to make sure we all understand what it is we're talking about potentially doing here. And I think, and I know we've talked about this a lot, but just to defend, I wasn't part of those conversations, it was some of my staff, but just to defend that process a little bit, when someone comes in to ask us about a certain use for a property, we have a table of uses that are allowed or not allowed in the code. The purpose of that zoning code is to give predictability not only to the surrounding property owners, but also to the person that owns the property. They have predictability of the types of uses that are allowed for their property. They know they can send someone, if a potential tenant comes in, they can say, hey, here's the list of uses. If you're one of those, you can come into my property. If you're not, you're not. And I want to make sure that it's understood that when the inquiries were made about the property, it wasn't, the question wasn't, can we do outdoor storage? It was, can we do an RV sales? That use is allowed or not allowed. Can we do a contractor's yard? So as we look at potentially negotiating a development agreement for this site, it's about those uses. It's about what do we feel comfortable with on that property, what don't we feel comfortable? And my only concern about that is that, we could certainly, if something was proposed for us to look at, we could certainly review that and say, yeah, we could maybe work with that or not. But my concern is, what if, as we look at these uses as staff, what if we say, gosh, we just still don't feel comfortable with that use, that it's not so much again, outdoor storage could be allowed on a nursery use today on that CP1 property. It's not, but it's that use. It's that, contractor storage yard. Does all the outdoor storage that would be allowed in a contractor storage yard make sense? Maybe not. Maybe not that close to residential. Having, backhoes and track hose and things that close and across the street, sticking up above a fence. That's my concern, is that we're really talking about this list of uses. That's what it comes down to is we have to be able to say this is predictable for both the property owner and the neighbors. And so I think that you've got a proposal in front of you for a zone change. You can take action on that zone change. You want to come back with something that's substantially different that the neighbors could come in and comment on. But what the proposal is for a zone change to M2. If we're gonna walk that back to some other zone, that we haven't noticed for that. We haven't sent out the required public notices for that. So that would take time, and I think is more than just continuing it to the next meeting. I think we'd have to have a conversation with the Planning Commission about a development agreement. That's not what's been proposed, though. What's been proposed is the change to the zoning for M2. So that's just what I wanted to say about that. I think we're open to those discussions, but as staff, we have to look at what is allowed in that zone and make our decisions and give our recommendations based on that.
And I appreciate that, Chad, but as me sitting here as a council person, he's requesting a zone that I'm not totally comfortable giving him, but I might be comfortable in giving him some of the uses with the development agreement that only that zone allows. So that's where I'm coming from. I don't think I'm in a position to just say, no way on the M, because I can see there's some uses like the warehousing. I can see it's not even allowed in the CP1 where it is in the M1. It would have no detrimental effects, relatively little. So I'm just saying, I'm not ready to just say no tonight. So I'm trying to give a little wiggle room for you and them to come up with something. How legally you do that, that's another story.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think if you wanted to go back and look at something different, I think what I would say is don't do it to a date, time certain. We would just need to renotice. We'd need to come up with whatever that is and send those notices back out so that the neighbors have a chance to come in and comment on that, because I think it's going to take some time. I don't think it's something we can necessarily work out by the next city council meeting.
And that's fine with me. To me, it doesn't have to be date certain. In the past, we've always had it date certain, so we don't do like Dave says and just drag on. So.
Yeah, but you're talking people's lives here and the fact that it's a home.
Yeah, but you're talking all kinds of people's lives on both sides.
Correct.
So I'll stick with my motion to just table this for tonight and have them get together and see what they can come up with.
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we postpone the decision here on the rezone request. I'll take a roll call. They can find out a better solution right now. Okay, that concludes item number B. We will now move on to item number C, which is amend the municipal code. Chad, would you mind taking that one? Oh, excuse me, we need to invite Councilmember Bloxham back in. Sorry. I know, it just dawned on me, hey, he's not here. He's probably asleep by now.
He wouldn't have got to sleep that way.
All right, just give me just a moment to bring up a couple things here.
Is that how long ago?
Okay, we talked about this at a previous meeting and just in our work session before this meeting, but these are some proposed amendments to the land use definitions and regulations. This was initiated by some requests from some folks that are wanting to develop a true mixed-use project with a mix of uses that share the same building, and they had requested that we look at our use table to see if there's some things that could go in mixed-use zoning specifically related to some light manufacturing, those types of uses that would be conducted interior to a building that would have fewer impacts, but that would give greater flexibility to those mixed-use zones. As we looked at that, we determined that there was an opportunity for us to look at some other things related to direction we received from the Planning Commission on consolidating some uses, on looking at permitted versus conditional use for some of the uses that are out there, and also looking at just some regulations that could allow for some of that flexibility in those mixed-use zones. So that's a background. I'm not going to go back through the entire presentation that we did a couple weeks ago, but I do want to just reiterate that one of the big issues on these use amendments is to look at mitigating any negative impacts from those light commercial flex manufacturing type uses. So in this case, sound's a big one, and we looked at, what's a relatively good sound sound level that people could operate at, that would be, not something that would be out of the ordinary with a residential use, or consistent with a residential use. You can see those sound levels on that decibel chart there. You start to get into 90 decibels with a hair dryer, and busy restaurants right around 85, 90. Some of those other uses, city street, that's an adjacent city street, loud radio in that 70 to 75. So as we looked at those, we proposed to set that decibel level at 85. One of the concerns as we talked about that issue with the council and with the planning commission was, does that apply across the board? Does that apply all day long into the night? As we looked at these uses and wanted to make sure we could try to be compatible, we looked at when that could be appropriate. I'm going to jump back to some of this in just a minute, but the sound that we propose as part of a slight amendment to the code after meeting with some of our council members would be to limit those hours of operation so that the sound is limited and those impacts are limited. 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., and that would be on those light industrial uses that don't necessarily share a wall with a residential use, and on those that do share a wall, we'd increase that a little bit and say 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. for those. Sundays are prohibited on both. Saturdays are prohibited on the one that shares the wall, just to try to give a little extra, consideration for those uses that are sharing a wall. So that's a slight change from what's in your packet, but that's what we would propose to address that concern that was raised. It was a good concern by some of our council members. Other things that have changed since that version that you saw, just go quickly through those. We've looked at, I keep scrolling back and forth, I apologize for that, but we've looked at some of the uses that would require a retail storefront area. We've determined that some of those light commercial flex manufacturing areas might have a little retail store area where they sell some of the goods that they make there, and so we want to make sure that is something that could be included as part of that. And that would also apply in some of those zones where it's not a mixed-use zone, but a light commercial flex, like a CP1 zone, for example, where light commercial flex manufacturing is now allowed. They could have a retail component with that. Other changes related to, this is in your packet, but we wanted to make sure that as we look at these live-work units that we're being sensitive to the fact that there are areas that are more commercially viable than others. Right now our code has a 12-foot first floor requirement. We've recognized that on some of those side streets that probably is not as commercially viable, and that could potentially go down to 9 feet on some of those live-work units. Specifically to those that do not front onto Main Street, that could be used for residential and or commercial uses, could have maybe a smaller ceiling height, and then putting those 12-foot ceiling heights where they make sense on the Main Street frontages where you want to have flexibility. One of the thoughts is that you want to make sure that even though you might allow residential there, if you have the 12-foot ceiling height, someone could come back and establish commercial use later on. And we want to make sure that those are on those most viable commercial frontages and give some flexibility for those that are not right on one of those busier streets. Main Street really is the street for our MU and our MUTOD, where we would anticipate those types of mixes of uses vertically, and to some extent, vertically is the issue there. So that is the new information. We gave you a lot of information before. I've got the land use table also open here. I can go back to that. You can look at those uses that we propose on the various zones. Tim went through this before. I'm not going to take the time to go through it again, but if it's got an L and a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on it, that means there's some limitations to those uses that apply. I can bring those up for you if you'd like. Those are actually in your packet, and I could find that page number for you, but what those L1, 2, 3, and 4 mean. That is the recommendation that the council approve these changes to the land use table and to some of our definitions to consolidate some of these uses and to allow for some additional flexible uses in our MU and MUTOD zone, along with some of the other zones. The Planning Commission did review this after making, some good changes, some good suggestions, did forward a recommendation of approval to the council. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Council, have any questions on this?
I have a comment. I think you've done real well on it, Chad, except for I have a little question on the hours. 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. seems a little late and a little early.
On the sound,
Yeah. I'd feel more comfortable if it was like a little earlier in the evening, a little later in the morning, like the other one.
our sound ordinance, I guess we were trying to dial it back a little bit already from 10 to 6, back to maybe 9 to that's a policy call on your part. If the council would like to make that change to those hours, I think we're trying to give a little bit of flexibility on the hours of operation for those use, recognizing that that's pretty reasonable to hear business sounds up to that point, and then that gives you some quiet time at night. But again, that's a policy call, and if you guys would like to modify those,
I
if
mean,
the
even
council
if
would
it
like to
was
modify
8 and
those.
8, seems more reasonable to me, but that's just me. Other than that, I think you've done a good job.
Yeah, thank you. And if the council would like to make that change, we're certainly open to that. And you're
Anybody else
talking
wanna-
about on this one particularly, 9 to 7. Maybe one thing that would help as you're considering that would be for uses that don't share that common wall. So we did restrict it to 6 to 8 for something that does share a common wall or floor. So there is already built into this language a little bit of difference between uses that you might have a mixed use that's a horizontal mixed use throughout a site where they're actually separated by 40, 50 feet, from the residential uses. And that might be the one that, again, so that was our thought process, but certainly if you wanted to push that back a little bit, that's fine. One thing I will say is that applies to sound. Just one more thing on that. So you could still have the business operating, they just have to shut that equipment off. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, this is a public hearing. I'll open it up now for any type of public comment regarding item number C, which is an amend our Layton Municipal Code. Okay, seeing that there's none out there, and I just want to verify, since even though we've asked everyone to turn in any type of questions online, to do so by 3 p.m. today. Gary, there hasn't been any last minute things, have there? Okay, very good. Okay, council, I'll look for action on item number C then.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion first that we close this public hearing, and that make a motion that we adopt ordinance 2038, amending the Layton City Municipal Code, Title 19, on zoning, Chapter 1902 on the definitions, 1906 on land use regulations as it relates to tables 6.1 and 6.2, Chapter 1925 on the mixed-use zoning district, and 1926 on the MUTOD zoning district in support of the land use vision and policies provided in the general plan.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. I'll do a roll call vote on this.
Just for clarification real quick, Mayor, that's with those changes that
I don't
with the
think so.
changes to
No.
hours, or?
Nobody accepted them.
You
You
didn't
don't want to change the hours,
I
right,
think
Dawn?
the hours are appropriate
Okay.
for the way they are.
about it.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor in a second. Councilman Bloxham,
Aye.
Councilman Day,
Yes.
Councilman Fitzpatrick,
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Morris.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous. So it's been moved and passed, and the public hearing has been closed. I do have one item of unfinished business here, which I'd just like to announce that unfortunately, we've had a past mayor within our city that actually served our city for over 15 years, Mayor Shields. He did pass away this past weekend, and he began his term in 1970, and so I think it goes with the acknowledgement that we need to let the folks know that a mayor that served our city very well has passed, and that his services will be on Monday. So Okay, council. We have some, I'll look for a motion to close our council meeting and move back into a work meeting.
Closed door meeting,
Well, we have to go into a work meeting first, and then we can go into a closed door. So I'll look for a motion to close our council meeting and move into a work meeting.
I make a motion that we close this meeting, whatever it is, council meeting, and move into closed doors session, whatever you want to call that.
Okay.
Work meeting.
Okay,
Second that motion.
it's been moved and second. All in favor?
Oh,
Okay, now I'll look for a motion to go into, right now, to open up a regular work meeting, and with a motion, I know you stated it as one, but it has to be two separate ones for the minutes. Sorry, I know that for clarify earlier.
You have to do it again?
So I can't, yeah, I need you to say that we will go into,
I
that
make
we
a
are now
motion.
opening up a council meeting, going into a closed door. Excuse me. God, I'm all screwed up now. We're opening up a work meeting to move into a closed door meeting to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real estate
Whatever.
property.
I make a motion, this meeting's over, right? And we're gonna move into the next meeting, which is gonna be closed doors. Is that good enough, or do you need verbiage?
Would that clarify okay, Gary?
And along with that, I want to start at 9:20.
Yeah, I'll second it.
It's been moved in second. All in favor?